Entente Cardinal, that wonderful meeting that they had today. It was some sort of bromance. £500 million. Wow, a detention centre in France. Incredible. Do you trust them? Do you trust that Rishi Sunak can handle that? Do you think that they'll actually be able to get that through? Will it make a difference? Then we'll be looking at the weather. Of course, it's an absolute nightmare. Across the UK, there are blizzards out there, people stranded in their vehicles. Our reporters are up and down the country giving you the latest, the lowdown on what's happening with that. And, of course, we'll be moving on. We love the royal family as ever. Prince Edward has been awarded the title of Duke of Edinburgh on his 59th birthday. It was something the Queen, the late Queen, had asked, and Philip had asked that should be given to him. We'll be delving into that with Michael Cole later on in the show. And, of course, Gary Lineker. Of course, I can't let him go, can I? Should he actually be sacked now? It doesn't even seem like he cares. All that and more on GB News. As ever, you can get in touch in the usual way. GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has agreed to give France almost £500 million over the next 3 years in an attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. The Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today before announcing the landmark deal, one which will see a new detention centre established in France. The joint news conference followed the first bilateral summit between the two countries in 5 years. Mr Sunak says the new illegal migrant legislation introduced this week supports this new deal.
We're announcing a new detention centre in northern France, a new command centre bringing our enforcement teams together in one place for the first time, and an extra 500 new officers patrolling French beaches, all underpinned by more drones and other surveillance technologies that will help ramp up the interception rate. And the legislation the UK has introduced this week supports this because it's designed to break the business model of the criminal gangs and remove the pull factors bringing them to the Channel coast.
The French will also contribute significantly to funding, with President Macron saying this isn't simply a deal between France and the UK.
I do believe that the right way to approach these migrations is a broader space. Western Balkans, European Union, and not just France and UK, have to work closely together in order precisely to dismantle these groups and to be more efficient regarding this phenomenon.
The UK economy grew by 0.3% in January. The latest data from the Office for National Statistics shows a bounce back from the fall seen in December last year. The Chancellor says the return to growth proves the economy is more resilient than many expected. Ahead of his spring budget on Wednesday, he's added, though, there's still a long way to go. The Labour leader's discussed his plans to prioritise Scottish innovation to boost the economy. Sir Keir Starmer's in Glasgow with Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. He says Scotland's creativity has been held back by governments at Holyrood and Westminster.
What I want is an economy in Scotland that is bursting forward. We have a mission for the next Labour government to have the highest sustained growth in the G7. For Scotland, that would take us hugely forward with the jobs of the future, the skills of the future. At the moment, the problem we've got is that productivity is low, living standards are low, start-ups in Scotland are failing at a greater rate than elsewhere in the UK. This is, Scotland has a great history when it comes to our economy, so we want to turn that around.
Drivers have been left stranded for hours with heavy snowfall holding up traffic. Storm Larissa hit the UK overnight, causing flights to be suspended and rail services delayed as fallen trees blocked some lines. The Met Office has yellow warnings for snow and ice in place for parts of the UK over the weekend, and people are being urged to only travel if necessary. Hamburg police have named the man behind a mass shooting at a Jehovah's Witness hall in the city as German national Philip F. At least 8 people died, including a woman and her unborn baby. Police say the gunman acted alone and later took his own life. His motives are unknown. They say the 35-year-old was a former member of the Jehovah's Witness community. He had no criminal record and possibly suffered, they say, from mental illness. And Prince Edward has been named as the new Duke of Edinburgh. The title has been granted by his brother King Charles on the Prince's 59th birthday and will be held for his lifetime. His wife Sophie becomes the Duchess of Edinburgh. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Nana Queer.
Good afternoon. It is fast approaching 7 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Aquera. I'm in for Patrick Christys. Now, we've got loads to get through, but there's only one place to start. Of course, it's got to be Rishi Sunak, who's agreed to give France almost £500 million. And it kind of sounds less when you say 500 million, in an attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. Now, the Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in France today before announcing this landmark 3-year deal, which will also see a new detention centre established in France.
Emmanuel and I share the same belief. Criminal gangs should not get to decide who comes to our countries. Within weeks of my coming into office, we agreed our largest ever small boats deal. And today we've taken our cooperation to an unprecedented level to tackle this shared challenge. We're announcing a new detention centre in northern France, a new command centre bringing our enforcement teams together in one place for the first time, and an extra 500 new officers patrolling French beaches. All underpinned by more drones and other surveillance technologies that will help ramp up the interception rate. And the legislation the UK has introduced this week supports this, because it's designed to break the business model of the criminal gangs and remove the pull factors bringing them to the Channel coast. Now, we will always comply with our international treaty obligations, but I am convinced that within them that we can do what is necessary to solve this shared problem and stop the boats.
Well, are you impressed? To get more on the deal, I can speak to our political reporter, Olivia Upley. Olivia, so can you just briefly outline the things that he was highlighting?
So what the deal includes is essentially Britain is paying France £478 million over the next 3 years to fund more policing of the beaches in France and the routes commonly used by people traffickers bringing migrants over from Britain to France. A new detention centre in northern France for migrants. So that's tackling the problem upstream, as politicians like to put it, and that is quite a big breakthrough. Then we've got the technology elements, so drones and other new ways to try and see what's going on with these migrants and to try and stop them through technological means. And in some ways, it's a really good deal for Britain. It's much bigger than anything that's been agreed previously. This is the very first time that we've seen a detention centre in France, paid for, yes, by some British money, but as Rishi Sunak was at pains to point out there, the French are actually investing more in this than the Brits. So in some respects, this is a very good deal for Britain. The other very good element for Britain is that relationship between Britain and France is looking far more cordial than it has for years and years and years. So this was the first Anglo-French summit for the last 5 years. They used to happen every year, but under both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson before her, relationships had soured to such a point that Britain and France were sort of barely on speaking terms. So this warmer relationship between Britain and France could lay the groundwork for, at some point, but not yet, an EU-wide UK returns deal for migrants, which would be a real win for the Prime Minister and for Britain, because what Britain ideally wants eventually is to be able to send migrants who've come here illegally back to the country that they came through in the EU. Now, we're not there yet, but the French have said that they have an ambition towards that. So we are sort of on the first step there. So there are lots of big wins for Britain there, but it has cost Britain a lot. So just to put it into perspective, over the last 3 years, Britain has spent 232 million on helping the French to police the beaches and helping the French to stop the boats, essentially. In the next, that's since 2014, so 7 years. Now, in the next 3 years, we're going to be spending 500 million on the same sort of projects, although admittedly beefed up versions of the same projects. So lots of wins for Britain, but it costs us quite a lot, is my summary.
But if it works, because at the moment we're spending, what is it, 6 billion, and actually housing the 50,000 migrants that we have at the moment in 98% of the 98% of this country. So if we can stop that, then it would almost be, it feels like actually it'd be quite good value for money in the long run.
I mean, yeah, 500 million would be a drop in the ocean if it actually succeeded in stopping the boats. It's not at all clear that it will, I mean, entirely stop the boats, I think, is far too much to hope for. And we do need to hear quite a lot more details about this detention centre that's going to be set up in France. Because, as you say, at the moment, there are 50,000 migrants being housed in hotels around the UK. I mean, that's up from 2,500, I think it was, just a few years ago. It seems very unlikely that a French detention centre will be able to hold anywhere near that number. But it is definitely a step in the right direction. And yes, as you say, if it really makes inroads in stopping those boats, as the Prime Minister likes to put it, that's the parlance that we're all used to, it's coming out of CCHQ, they know it's popular with the public, then, of course, it would be just a drop in the ocean. It would be great news.
And in a way, he's slightly stolen Sir Keir Starmer's thunder, because Sir Keir Starmer was saying that we'll deal with the problem upstream, but then never gave any detail, which he never does. Will the Labour Party, in your view, do you think they will be warming to this prospect that the Conservative Party appear to be coming up with things that may well save them, potentially?
Well, it does put Labour in quite an awkward position, because in previous years, the Conservative Party was determined to sort of own the issue of stopping the boats, and generally the Labour Party didn't mention illegal immigration too much, because it's a contentious issue with Labour voters, some of whom believe that we should have more of an open borders policy. So stopping the boats hasn't traditionally been a big issue for Labour, but the way that Labour could always gain ground over the Conservatives was to say that, well, we'll work closely with the French. And under both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, the Conservatives couldn't really counter that, because, as I say there, in the last 5 years, relationship with the French have really, really soured. Boris Johnson refused to say whether Emmanuel Macron was a friend or a foe in an interview. And under Liz Truss, I mean, they were literally barely on speaking terms. So what Keir Starmer would do is essentially avoid the issue of small boats and illegal immigration generally. And if he had to address it, he would say, well, we will work with the French. Now, as you say, it feels as though Rishi Sunak's stolen his thunder here, because he is most certainly working with the French. That bromance is looking stronger than ever before.
He's got some grip on these politicians. I mean, you saw what he did to Ursula.
Absolutely. Turning on the charm.
I know. Olivia Utley, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right, let's get some reaction to the new migrants deal. I'm joined now by the former Brexit Party MEP, Ben Habib. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. Ben, your first thoughts on Rishi's plan with Macron?
Well, I'm afraid I don't share any of Olivia's optimism. You know, if you look at the way this problem has developed, the more money we've paid France, the greater the number of people crossing the Channel. And contrary to what the Prime Minister described the problem as, it's not a shared problem. There's an asymmetry of interest at the heart of this problem. The French want the migrants off their shores, and they want our cash. And of course, if they were ever to stop the migrants genuinely from crossing the Channel, our cash would stop. So it would be turkeys and Christmas. No, I'm afraid that all we have is evidence that paying money to France does not work. More than doubling that, I think last year we paid 62 million, we're meant to pay 72 million this year. And that's going to now effectively rise to 150 million a year for the next 3 years. You know, more than doubling that is merely fueling the beast. And I don't accept for a second either that building a detention centre in France is going to address the problem. I'm sure the French would love it, because it helps them cope with their own issues with migrants coming into the country. They have a much bigger problem, of course, than we do. They've got about 180,000 a year coming into France, which is a function of freedom of movement. We very rarely talk about that in the UK. But the reason the French, the Germans, and so many other European countries have such a massive problem with illegal migration is because they've got freedom of movement across the continent, which is utterly balmy. And we, the British taxpayers, are picking up quite a lot of the tab for that. But just coming back to the issue and point, which is this new deal with the French, I don't for a second think it's going to work. I think that £500 million is going to be wasted money. We're going to be exactly where we are now. In fact, we're going to be in a worse position at the end of this year because numbers are going to be even higher than they are. And the other thing that the Prime Minister said quite categorically in his speech in France was that we would not be breaking any international treaties or laws in order to pass this new illegal migration bill that was revealed earlier this week. That means he's categorically committed to the European Court of Human Rights. And if that is genuinely the British position, then the European Court of Human Rights will be able to intercede and overrule British courts when they come to adjudicate whether or not someone's got the right to stay here pursuant to this new bill that's been released. So nothing is going to change domestically, legally, and nothing is going to change in our relationship with France. If France was genuine, if France was really genuine in wanting to help the British stop the flow of illegal crossings from France into the United Kingdom, it would immediately agree the right for us to send these boats back to France, to hook onto these boats in the Channel, and for Border Force to take them back to France and to deposit them straight back into a French port. And the question the British taxpayers should be asking themselves is, if France isn't prepared to do that, it clearly isn't in good faith. So why are we spending even a penny on trying to cooperate with the French?
But some would say that actually they are cooperating because obviously they have a problem as well. They're going to have a dedicated force, some sort of kind of police force that are going to deal with that specifically. And, you know, we're going to have some sort of relationship and partnership. I mean, after all, we are spending £6 billion now, because that's gone up, right, to house 50,000 asylum seekers in hotels across this country. Something has to be done. Surely that is a start and step in the right direction.
But no, we finance the creation of this force that walks up and down French beaches, on occasion slashing the odd dinghy. You know, we helped the French create that, but it hasn't stopped the flow of these illegal migrants. And we've now, I think, got some British members of the constabulary based in France as well, and that hasn't helped. All I'm saying is that if you look at the economics of the relationship with France and the underlying benefits and costs, the more money we pay them, the more they're incentivized actually to keep the problem going, because it keeps the money flowing into France. And they want to get rid of these people from France themselves. So why would they seek to stop them? All we're doing is fueling the beast. We've got the economics of this completely back to front. The only deal worth doing with France is one which allows us to pick up these people in the Channel and deposit them back in French ports. The fact that the French won't allow us to do that says to me the French are not in good faith. We don't need a returns agreement with France. The people should be allowed to be picked up in the Channel and taken straight back to France. That's the only deal that would work. And then the border force could actually do its job, intercept these boats and take them straight back to French shores. That, I would support that wholeheartedly, but we're going to be a year down the road, more money will be spent. Rishi Sunak may pick fights with the Labour Party and try and distinguish the Conservatives from the Labour Party as the party that wishes to stop boats and try and get some electoral advantage out of that. But I think anyone who's actually watching what's going on, any member of the electorate watching what's going on in a year's time, is going to hold the Conservatives fundamentally at fault for failing to stop the boats.
Well, listen, Ben Habib, some would say it's an international problem, and actually we actually need some sort of international police force, and that this simply turning the boats back won't really make that much difference. But I respect your thoughts. Ben Habib, thank you so much for joining me. He's the former Brexit Party MEP. Well, joining me now is Tony Smith, CBE, who's the former Director General of the UK Border Force. Thank you very much, Tony, for joining me. OK, so you heard what Ben said. Is he right in his analogy that this is actually kind of really a fob off, and actually if France just simply turned the boats back or allowed us to return the boats, this would literally end it?
No, I don't think he is. And actually, the Border Force is doing its job, Nana. It's been doing it all along. The Border Force can only operate within the legislation and the powers that it has. And at the moment, we don't have the powers or the authorities to send people back to France, or else we would do that. But I do welcome this, Nana, because I spent a great deal of time in the Home Office, in the Border Force and the Immigration Service, and in my latter years in service, a lot of time with the French. And I've said to you before, operationally, we get on extraordinarily well with them. They don't like smugglers, they don't like illegal entrants, and they will work with us if we have the political direction. That's why I applaud what the Prime Minister has done today. This is a culmination, I think, of a series of meetings that have been going on since he came to office and since Suella Braverman came to office, of trying to bridge this gap by talking to the French as being a shared problem. I don't think that's always been our political position in the past. And I think that this has got legs. And I really hope it works. I'm actually quite heartened by the fact that we have got this new arrangement. Obviously, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, won't it, Nana? But I think thus far, this is a really good move by the British government. And I'm quite hopeful that it will help us at least to stop the boats or slow down the flow of boats, which is our first priority.
Well, too right, Tony, and what good is a pudding that you can't eat? Now, let's look to the things that he suggested then, because he said that they put in 500 million, which actually isn't that much in my view if you consider it's over 3 years and the amount that we're spending currently housing asylum seekers in hotels. If we can reduce that in some way, in any way, or stop that, that would be incredible. But the other thing he talked about was a kind of joint kind of force that would deal with this on French soil, and then a detention centre. Do you think that that is a realistic solution as well, or a good start at least?
Well, on your first point, I agree with your economic analysis, Nana, because you've just said that, 6 million a day on hotels, do the maths. That's 180 million a month. And we're talking about giving the French that in a year. If it even does that, 3 billion a year now, I hear, on the asylum system. And if we're going to introduce detention camps for newcomers, that's very, very expensive. So I think, the costs do stack up if it works. I think the question of the detention centre is really interesting. I was really interested in your Mark White's report, Nana, which came out a couple of weeks ago, that I spoke to Patrick about, where we are now seeing displacement by the gangs. They are being pushed out of Dunkirk and Calais, much, much further down the coast, where it's implausible for them to get across the channel in small boats. So I think, and I'm hearing 50% disruption rate. The problem with that is, as you know, the 50%, they're going to keep going, they're going to be hiding in the dunes, they're going to keep coming. I'm really interested, well, what is this detention centre? Who's going in it? How long are they going to stay in it? And what's going to happen to them when they come out of it? Now, they may decide to move them away from the Calais zone, further into the French hinterland, or better still, further away into the EU. But the French have the same problem as us, Nana. When it comes to removing asylum seekers from your territory, it's really, really difficult now, because a great many source and transit countries simply won't take them back.
And there was also no mention of other safe and legal routes to cross, which is ultimately the reason why the majority of these people are coming in via that way, although I'm not sure whether even if we did, they would do that, but that's what the argument is. Do you think perhaps there should have been more focus on that as well?
Well, I've always been opposed to safe and legal routes, particularly in Calais or northern France, because that's just going to attract more migrants into northern France in hope and expectation they'll be able to get here, and disappointed applicants will still come in the boats, won't they? However, I think there is an argument to be had, and I think Macron made it very clear this is an EU competence, not a French competence, with the EU about burden sharing, and the extent to where, if there are people who have family relatives in the UK who might be entitled to come here, that might be the quid pro quo that we're looking for a safe third country agreement. But I think that's a long way down the road. They've made it very clear that's not on the agenda right now, but I suspect that's part of the long-term plan, because the only way for sure to fix this would be that we would agree with the French. Everybody would go straight back as soon as they reached our territorial wall. Rest assured, none of the border force would do that. If they were empowered to do that, absolutely they would, but they're not. But we need political agreement on that, and that's why I'm really heartened that we are at least now talking to the French, the EU, about these much bigger issues, because that's the only way I think in the end we're going to crack this.
Well, I suppose in a way Ben was right in one respect, that if we turned people back and they went back to the place they'd come from, they would probably give up. That would probably be, it would work. So we need to get there. It's going to take a while. Tony, thank you very much for talking to me. That's Tony Smith, former Director General of the UK Border Force. Right, well, you couldn't have missed it. Much of the UK is under a blanket of snow. And we sent our reporter Paul Hawkins some of the worst hit places. Can't wait to have a chat with him. I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News. That'll be after this.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's fast approaching 28 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akwe. Now, the trial of the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell is continuing at Manchester Crown Court. Thomas Cashman is charged with the murder of Olivia, who was shot inside her home in Liverpool last August. Now, Cashman has also been charged with attempted murder, wounding with intent, and possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life. He denies the charges. Let's cross to GB News' Northwest reporter Sophie Reaper, who's outside Manchester Crown Court. Sophie, what can you tell us?
Well, this morning, the court heard from a witness who can't be named for legal reasons. That was via a pre-recorded police interview in which the witness recalled exactly what they remember from that night back in August of last year. The witness began by saying they were asleep, but they remember feeling someone tapping on their leg. They then heard someone saying, it's Tommy, repeatedly. The witness said, I thought it was a nightmare. They then recalled Thomas Cashman stuttering with his hands on his head, saying he'd been told by a source that someone was coming for him. The witness told the police he's went to get them before they got him, and later that he'd said something along the lines of, lad, I've done Joey. The jury then heard that Mr. Cashman reportedly asked the witness for some clothing, to which they obliged, giving him a pair of navy blue tracksuit bottoms. Later in the interview, the witness confirmed that a pair of tracksuit bottoms recovered from Mr. Cashman's sister's house were in fact the same pair they had given them on the night of the incident. Finally, the witness recounted their anger with Mr. Cashman, saying to the police, "I want to see Tommy and ask him why he chose to come to my house. He's jeopardised everyone else's life just to save his own back." Now, court has concluded here in Manchester for today. It's due to resume again on Monday morning. We're expecting to hear the other half of the evidence from this witness.
Willis and Sophie, thank you very much for that update. And of course, we will keep you up to date with that as it happens. Right, well, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. Find out why Prince Edward has received an extra special 59th birthday present from King Charles. And there's a real treat for you, all you dog lovers out there. Dogs hate me, I don't know why that is. As we cross the line after the world's famous Crufts dog show. But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Anna, thank you. It's just gone 3:30, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has agreed to give France almost £500 million over the next 3 years in an attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. The Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today. The pair then announced a landmark deal, one which includes a new detention centre to be established in France. Speaking after the first UK-French summit for 5 years, Mr Sunak said today marks a new beginning in relations between the two countries.
We're announcing a new detention centre in northern France, a new command centre bringing our enforcement teams together in one place for the first time, and an extra 500 new officers patrolling French beaches, all underpinned by more drones and other surveillance technologies that will help ramp up the interception rate. And the legislation the UK has introduced this week supports this, because it's designed to break the business model of the criminal gangs and remove the pull factors bringing them to the Channel coast.
The Labour leader, meanwhile, has discussed his plans to prioritise Scottish innovation to boost the economy. Sir Keir Starmer was in Glasgow with Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. He says Scotland's creativity has been held back by governments at Holyrood and Westminster. Drivers have been left stranded for hours with heavy snowfall holding up traffic. Storm Larissa hit the UK overnight, causing flights to be suspended and rail services delayed as fallen trees blocked some lines. The Met Office has yellow warnings for snow and ice in place for parts of the UK over the weekend, and people are being urged to only travel if necessary. And Hamburg police have named the man behind a mass shooting at a Jehovah's Witness hall in the city as German national Philipp F. At least 7 people died, including a woman and her unborn baby. Police say the gunman acted alone and later took his own life. His motives are unknown. They say the 35-year-old was a former member of the Jehovah's Witness community. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Nana.
If you just joined me, good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Well, you couldn't have missed it especially if you're up north. Heavy snow has brought chaos to much of this country, with parts of it by gales, blizzards, all of that. And more than 10 inches of snow fell overnight in the Welsh village of Capel Currig. And roads, rail lines and airports have all been closed after the UK was hit by Storm Larissa. I wonder how long it took them to come up with that name. Paul Hawkins is the only GB News reporter brave enough to venture out in the weather, and he joins me now from the village of Barkis Island. Is that Barkis Land in West Yorkshire? Have I got that right? Barkis Land?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll be honest, I don't know, to be honest. I should probably clarify. Listen, Nana, I've got to say, you're saying it's brave to be out in the weather. Just look at this. This is like the ice world of Hoth, which will only mean something to you if you're a Star Wars fan. It's fantastic on this hill. Up here, look, having a few snowball fights. There's someone coming down the hill here. Look, here he goes on the toboggan. And this dog's having a fantastic time over here as well, jumping around in the snow. Everyone's having so much fun over here. And over here, if you pan back round this way, we've got a family who've been having a snowball fight. I'm just going to have a quick word, if you come with us, with Jamie, who's one of the dads in the family, who was telling me that they went... Jamie, you went skiing last weekend, is that right?
Yeah, we just a few of our friends. We went for our wedding anniversary and stuff. So we went to Lineker and stuff in south of France. Yeah. So there were just a bit of snow left for us to ski on, but we've seen more snow here than we did last week.
Seen more snow here than in France.
Yeah.
Where you went skiing.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty good. Pretty good to get the skis back on and try have a go again. Yeah.
So is it not just the amount of snow, but also the quality of the snow?
Oh, it's better snow here. Yeah. British snow's miles better.
British snow's miles better. That's the line, isn't it?
Yorkshire snows.
Yorkshire snow, exactly. Yeah. What have you made about? I mean, obviously you're having a lot of fun here. Has it been? Has it disrupted you in other ways?
A little bit work-wise. We just I work in schools as well, so obviously it's a day off for me today. But yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Great stuff. All right, we'll leave you to it then.
Thank you.
Having your snowball fights, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, snowball fighting. I don't think we're winning.
All right, I'll step out of it. So kind of look, everyone's having a lot of fun now because the sun's come out and. You know, the roads are a little bit clearer now. They've been gritted, except the main roads and the motorways, that is. There are still problems on the minor roads. They need clearing. Tonight, it's going to drop to -7, -10. So the problem tomorrow... So it's just I'm being caught in the crossfire here. The problem tomorrow will be ice on the roads. So really dangerous driving conditions tomorrow, especially across the Pennines and across a lot of England. In fact, there are 4 yellow alerts in place across a lot of the country for ice. So that's going to be a big problem tomorrow because, of course, when you get clear skies... Looks fantastic when the sun's out, but it means it's going to be even colder at night. So, yeah, difficult driving conditions tomorrow. And just before I go, we should also add, because we want to show you something that we saw earlier. 2 guys, by the way, not just snowballing, not just tobogganing. We saw 2 guys skiing down the side of the Scammerdon Dam. Have a look at these pictures. One was snowboarding and one was skiing, taking their time on their day off from work. They couldn't go into work, so they thought they'd get the skis out, get the snowboard out, and then ski down the side of the dam. So that's another way to spend your time in the snow.
Wow, it looks gorgeous, actually, to be honest with you. But I bet it's cold, and I hate the cold. Paul Hawkins, thank you very much. That's GBNews' national reporter, Paul Hawkins. He's out there. Now, can you believe it, that it almost costs £15,000 a year to put a toddler in nursery? I mean, does the government need to step in, or should the taxpayer have to pay for other people to have children? I'm Nana Akua, this is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
And this Saturday, we've got an exclusive interview with the Chancellor.
I'm not going to have another leadership campaign.
Well, never again. You might do.
No, never again.
We'll be asking him about corporation tax rises, energy prices. We'll also be asking him about his time as Secretary of State for Health and Chairman of the Health Select Committee, and whether or not we should have had such a fierce lockdown.
It's an interview that you can't miss, so join us this Saturday, 10 to 12 on GB News, the People's Channel.
Absolutely not one to be missed. Welcome back. Prince Edward has given the title Duke of Edinburgh, which honours the wishes of the late Queen and Prince Philip. Now, the announcement has come on Edward's 59th birthday. The decision by King Charles means that Edward's wife, Sophie, who had been known as the Countess of Wessex, is now the Duchess of Edinburgh. Well, with me now is royal commentator Michael Cole. Michael, thank you very much for joining me. That's a lovely title. I did my Duke of Edinburgh. I was I'll be honest, I did cheat on my silver and I took a cab when I wasn't meant to, but it doesn't matter. Nobody knows about it. I've still got the medals. But this is a great honour, though, isn't it, really? Because this was literally Prince Philip's big baby. That was his baby. That was his thing.
Yeah, happy birthday, Prince Edward. If you're king, what do you give your baby brother? Well, you give him a royal dukedom. And what this does do, Nana, is actually gets away from the nonsense about Wessex, because when Prince Edward married Sophie Rhys-Jones on a very hot June day in 1999, I was there at Windsor reporting it for an American network. And I told the viewers, and I said, Wessex doesn't exist. There is an Essex, there is a Sussex, and there's a real Middlesex. But Wessex doesn't exist outside of the novels of Thomas Hardy. So this puts that all right, because certainly Edinburgh exists. It's built on volcanic granite, so it's a really solid place. And as you say, this is the wish of the late Duke of Edinburgh. He wanted his younger son to be follow in his footsteps, and of course the Queen endorsed it, and for a time it was on a Buckingham Palace website, but then there seemed to be some doubt, and the King seemed to be maybe favouring giving the title of Duchess of Edinburgh to Princess Charlotte. Well, that would have been a little bit hard perhaps for Sophie to swallow, being trumped by an 8-year-old princess. But let us say this, Nana, and I would give him full credit. Prince Edward has worked very, very hard over decades for the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. In fact, I used to work for a company that was a major sponsor of the scheme, and I went to big fundraising dinners in Cardiff and Birmingham and London, and Prince Edward was always there. So he's worked for this title, and he deserves it, and I'm sure he will give service, very good service, in the same way his father did, as the new Duke of Edinburgh.
And it's only really when you sort of see him that you realise how hard some of the royals, who are very quiet about their business, how hard they work. Because, you know, he's been working...
Yeah, but they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they put the hours in, and they follow and promote all the good causes. The old Queen Mary, who was the grandmother of the late Queen Elizabeth, she put it well to one of her complaining children. She said, "In the royal family, we love hospitals and we are never tired." That is their sense of royal duty. And they carry on with it. And let us be frank about it. I know Prince Edward reasonably well, and I remember him when he was trying to make his mark as a media mogul, which didn't work out too well. He's had his ups and downs, but he's knuckled down, and he's put his shoulder to the wheel, and he's done some good work for the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme. And now it's a scheme that bears his name, or he bears that title, and that seems to fit very well indeed. And it's a good thing. It tidies things up, and it will be proclaimed, if it hasn't been already, that he is the new Duke of Edinburgh, and of course Sophie is the new Duchess. And of course, in the last years of the Queen's life, Sophie became very close and was a helpmate to Her Majesty the Queen.
They should have given the Wessex ones to the Markles. I shouldn't.
That's another one.
Yeah, that's
You're
another
being
one.
naughty now.
What happens though with the title then? So does this title then pass down to his children and so on and so
No.
forth, or no?
No, it would revert to the monarch of the day upon the death of Prince Edward, and hope he's got many more years to come. No, it is not hereditary in that sense. But what is hereditary? His son, Viscount Severn, he has now become Earl of Wessex, so he's inherited the title of this non-place that doesn't exist. Unless you're King Alfred, he was the King of Wessex, but that was a long, long time ago. That was the 9th century. But we can speculate about that, and I'm sure that they will do well. And of course, Prince Edward, it also ought to be said, is in Edinburgh today. He's doing his bit up there. So the timing is good. You know, those grey men in Buckingham Palace quite often get things right. They work it out, what's going to get the headlines and what's going to actually resonate with people. And why should it not?
And very briefly then, if I can sneak one in, with regard to the titles, of course, so Harry and Meghan announced the titles for their children now, the Prince and Princess. Was that always inevitable? Or should they have not waited till King Charles had said something, or was it always that way? I mean, how does it work normally?
Well, it's a very perceptive question, because at the very second that Her Majesty died on September the 8th, rather sadly, we miss her still, they automatically became Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. But it wasn't formally proclaimed by the king. And what has happened here with this, a week ago, this christening in California at the Hilltop Mansion Fortress of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex with 30 people in attendance, is that they rather preempted it. They announced in a formal announcement through a magazine that Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened by the Episcopalian Bishop of Los Angeles. So that made it a fait accompli. At the time, the Buckingham Palace website was referring to her as Miss Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor. But that has now been amended, and Buckingham Palace has accepted what has happened. So they have stolen a march. They've rather upstaged the king. But Buckingham Palace can take all these things in its stride, and it will.
Well, it slightly makes a mockery of some of the comments that Meghan made on Oprah with regard to the titles. It proves that what she said wasn't true. She didn't really understand any of it. But anyway...
No, she didn't.
No, she clearly just didn't get it, did she? And
she didn't. Well, that was very, very unfortunate and very unfair, and should have been properly retracted, because the system was set up by King George V, who was the late Queen's grandfather. In 1917, he issued Latter's patent, which said that in future, the grandchild of the monarch of the day would automatically become a prince or a princess. That would be their styling. So it was nothing to do with any slight of any kind, and it certainly had absolutely nothing to do with race. And so to raise that subject, which is very, very unfair, and I know, Nana, you agree with me, it's a horrible slur to make, because it's easy to make and it's almost impossible to refute, because you have to prove a negative. And I think throwing that epithet around of racism is very unfair and very unwise. And I think more and more people have come to regard it as something that should not be done.
Well, I mean, they're still on their worldwide privacy tour, Michael, so let's hope they enjoy it. Michael Cole, thank you very much. He's a royal commentator. You just joined me, welcome on board. It's coming up to 49 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. Now, a survey by Save the Children has suggested that more than half of mothers with children aged 11 or younger have had to cut their working hours due to the expense of childcare. Now, this comes as a day after another report found that the average annual cost of a full-time nursery place for a child under 2 in Great Britain is almost £15,000. With me now is the financial journalist Sarah Benwell, who is the mother of an 8-month-old baby. I was going to say an 8-year-old baby. Crikey, Sarah. Sarah, listen, I know firsthand how expensive children and childcare is. As a single mum, I know I had to take out loans and get it all done. Sarah, why is it so expensive? It's just ludicrous.
I mean, it is ludicrous, and the averages even hide some of the numbers. I've been looking at childcare provision around me for Tabitha, my daughter, and it's outrageous. You know, there's one near me that costs £71 for half a day and almost 120 for a full day. So it's like £19,000 for half days or £30,000 for full days, which is, you know, more than the average person earns. They're huge. I mean, there's a few things that are going on here. There's a massive lack of provision. There's the fact that government funding doesn't actually match up to the 3 hours that nurseries have to provide. So when they offer government funding, they end up underfunded. Loads of nurseries are closing. Loads of childminders are closing. There's an awful lot of pressure in terms of what they have to keep up with in terms of early years provision and the guidelines they have to follow. There's ratio issues. The whole thing's a massive mess, and it's completely prohibitive, and it's terrifying. And you look at the numbers and you just think, well, God, no wonder so many families are struggling, and no wonder so many women are being forced out of the workforce when they don't want to be.
It's so disjointed. I think part of this is the short-termism in our politics, that you do 4 years and then suddenly there's another government, another one. Although these lot have been here for, 12, 13 years, and they've still managed to mess it up, and they haven't come up with anything that's of any real value. What do you think they could do if you're looking at it, obviously, as a financial journalist? Because I think, wow, £71 for half a day, these people must be minted, but they're not. The nurseries are struggling. So what can be done to fix it?
Yeah, that's the real sad thing about it. It sounds like nurseries should be minted, but they're not. You know, childcare providers are not paid nearly enough. The people who actually work and look after children aren't paid enough. I mean, it's hard to say what can be done. I guess we need to look at Europe, because we have one of the most expensive childcare rates in Europe, and see what's working well in other countries, looking at business rates, looking at fuel bills, looking at better funding, perhaps expanding tax-free childcare. I also think that the government needs to look quite carefully about where help's being targeted. So making sure, because I think there's an awful lot of middle earners who are being squeezed out, and that's a real huge problem as well. So looking at that, there's a lot that can be done. It just needs, as you say, kind of comprehensive policy, and it needs to be long-termist.
Well, it seems a bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul. So what they're doing is they're paying you to kind of stay in, and they're going to give you a little bit of money so that you can pay for the childcare, rather than allowing you to go to work and then taxing you from the income that you're making. It just seems a very backward way and an illogical way, because ultimately, as I understand it, women who are staying at home as a result of this would, if they were working, contribute, I think it's 5% of the GDP, I think what they were saying, which is a massive contribution and quite significant.
Yeah, I mean, economic inactivity is a massive thing, and the government has sort of recognised this. But then they had that mad scheme, was it last month, where they were like, we're going to write letters to women to encourage them back to work. We don't need letters. We want to come back to work. What we need is a complete overhaul of childcare provision, so that it's simple, it's straightforward, it's cost effective, it's safe, there's choice, all of these things. And I think it almost needs like taking apart from the ground up and rebuilding, because what there is at the moment isn't fit for purpose. And that's not a slight on the nurseries themselves, many of whom are wonderful. It's a slight on the system, the way that it's funded, and also the fact that somehow this all seems to be a women's problem when we stack the costs up against women's salary, and it's all not good, basically.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? And so how are you coping with it? What's your thing? Do you work whilst you're doing the childcare, or what happens with you?
Yeah, so my partner's on paternity leave at the moment, which has been great. Well, shared parental leave, in fact, which we've taken advantage of and has been great. I'm freelance, so I have quite a lot of flexibility. She's going to nursery from May. It's going to be expensive. We are prepared for that, but it is hard in a cost of living crisis to try and find the amount of money that any family's being asked to find to look after their children to stay at work. And the thing is, I'm a self-employed person. If I don't work for 4 years until she goes to school, my business is gone. Like, that's me out of the workforce forever. So I can't do that. So I'm having to work slightly odd hours. I'm having to work slightly odd days, while we kind of get to the point where she gets her 15 free hours, at which point it'll get a little bit easier, but it's not great still. We will cope, but it's hard work. And I have to admit, even though I knew childcare was expensive, and even though I'd mentally prepared for childcare being expensive, when I first started costing up nurseries near me and I saw how much they were, I was horrified. It's more than private school.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you just and you've got a partner as well. Think of those who are in a singles parent situation as well. Sarah, thank you so much. Really good to talk to you. That's Sarah Benwell. She's a financial journalist. Now, one of the greatest dog events in the world is back in Birmingham this week. I know animals, dogs hate me. Why? I'm nice. It's the second day of Crufts, where 18,000 canine contestants are competing for all sorts of prizes. Joining me now from Crufts is GB News' West Midlands reporter Jack Carson. Jack, come on, talk to me about it. What kind of a day is it so far, and what's been happening?
Well, it's incredibly busy here at Crufts. Over around 130,000 people are set to pass through these halls over the course of the 4 days that the event is on. Today in the arena we've had some agility, we've had some of the musical dogs which work with a routine, but we've also got over 200 breeds on display here at Crufts, and I'm with one of them now, the Great British Bulldog, and I'm with Lorraine, who's the secretary for the Bulldog Breed Council. Lorraine, tell me a little bit about what makes the Bulldog so great.
The Bulldog is so great because it's a wonderful family pet. It's actually a lovely person. It's alert and bold and courageous, but has a wonderfully affectionate nature. They have to be bought from a really good breeder, and that our job today here is to tell people where to buy their dogs from.
What are the things that people should look out for when buying a dog, and particularly a Bulldog?
For a Bulldog, the main thing you need to know is these dogs have to be health tested. You've got to buy from health tested parents. Really important that they're BOAS tested, which is the thing that most people worry about. And Bulldogs can't breathe, but actually they can breathe. But you need to buy them from BOAS tested parents. They're scored 0, 1, 2 or 3. You're looking to really buy a dog from a 0 or a 1 parent. Sorry about that.
So they say you should never work with animals. Tell me a bit about Phoenix then, and looking after him, because a lot of people are struggling with money at the minute. What's the situation?
With money. Now the thing is, you buy from a good breeder. Your good breeder will help you all the way. Phoenix is 18 months old. As you can see, she's rather fascinated by your microphone. She will eat, probably it costs me probably about £30 a month to feed a Bulldog, so you need to buy again a good food, but you can buy a reasonably priced food. If you've bought from a good breeder, they'll always support you, they'll always take a dog back. If you can't look after a dog, you go to a breeder, you give back to your breeder that will always help you out.
And tell me about what Phoenix and the other Bulldogs you got here have been entered into here in terms of the competition at Crufts.
We've got William, he's going to be in veteran, and yesterday we had our brindle puppy boy Duncan. He'll be in puppy dog on Sunday.
Perfect. Lorraine, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. The events continue here at Crufts with more agility tomorrow, and of course on Sunday the big one, Best in Show, where we'll find out of all the dogs entered here at Crufts which one takes the prize.
Thank you very much, Jack. That's Jack Carson. He's there at Crufts. He's our West Midlands reporter. This is GB News. Now, Rishi Sunak has promised to give France almost £500 million to end the channel migrant crisis, but will it work? And there's finally some good news for Chancellor Jeremy Hunt ahead of next Wednesday's budget. Stay tuned to find out more about this. I'm Nana Akbar. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online, and on digital radio. Don't forget as well, you can stream the show live on YouTube or download the GB News app completely free and check out all the programmes on the channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
An entente renewed. Those are the words of Rishi Sunak as he met with Macron today, and they discussed the migrant crisis. There are talks of £500 million plus a new kind of detention centre in France. But could Rishi manage to pull off the incredible and the unbelievable and actually stop the boats, which is what everyone's after? Then, of course, Jeremy Hunt. There's a pre-budget boost, apparently. I don't know whether I should give it away. We are not in recession, which is a good thing. Jeremy Hunt and his budget will be discussing that on the 15th, so we'll be talking about what's going on in this country with regard to that. Then, of course, Prince Edward is given the title of Duke of Edinburgh, and his wife Sophie given the Duchess of Edinburgh on his 59th birthday, awarded to him by the late Queen and Prince Philip. And then later on in the show, we'll discuss whether Gary Lineker should be sacked after all his little outbursts on Twitter. Is it time for the BBC to stand up to him, show some balls, and get rid of him? As ever, you can get in touch via the usual way. GBviews at GBNews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews. I'm Nana Acquia, but now it's time for your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's 4:01. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has agreed to give France almost £500 million over the next 3 years. That's in an attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. The Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today before announcing the landmark deal, which will see a new detention centre established in France. The joint news conference followed the first bilateral summit between the two countries in 5 years. Mr Sunak says the new illegal migrant legislation introduced this week supports this new deal.
We're announcing a new detention centre in northern France, a new command centre bringing our enforcement teams together in one place for the first time, and an extra 500 new officers patrolling French beaches, all underpinned by more drones and other surveillance technologies that will help ramp up the interception rate. And the legislation the UK has introduced this week supports this, because it's designed to break the business model of the criminal gangs and remove the pull factors bringing them to the Channel coast.
The French will also contribute, quote, significantly to funding, with President Macron saying this isn't simply a deal between France and the UK.
I do believe that the right way to approach this migrations is a broader space. Western Balkans, European Union, and not just France and UK, have to work closely together in order precisely to dismantle these groups and to be more efficient regarding this phenomenon.
The UK economy grew by 0.3% in January. The latest data from the ONS shows a bounce back from the fall seen in December last year. The Chancellor says the return to growth proves the economy is more resilient than many expected. Ahead of his spring budget on Wednesday, he added there's still a long way to go. The Labour leader has discussed his plans to prioritise Scottish innovation to boost the economy. Sir Keir Starmer is in Glasgow with Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. He says Scotland's creativity has been held back by governments at Holyrood and Westminster.
What I want is an economy in Scotland that is bursting forward. We have a mission for the next Labour government to have the highest sustained growth in the G7. For Scotland, that would take us hugely forward with the jobs of the future, the skills of the future. At the moment, the problem we've got is that productivity is low, living standards are low, start-ups in Scotland are failing at a greater rate than elsewhere in the UK. This is, Scotland has a great history when it comes to our economy, so we want to turn that around.
Well, drivers were left stranded for hours this morning with heavy snowfall holding up traffic. Storm Larissa hit the UK overnight, causing flights to be suspended and rail services delayed as fallen trees blocked some train lines. The Met Office has yellow warnings for snow and ice in place for parts of the UK over the weekend, and people are being urged to only travel if necessary. Hamburg police have named the man behind a mass shooting at a Jehovah's Witness hall in the city as German national Philip F. At least 8 people died, including a woman and her unborn baby. Police say the gunman acted alone and later took his own life. His motives are still unknown. They say the 35-year-old was a former member of the community. He had no criminal record and possibly suffered from mental illness. And Prince Edward has been named as the new Duke of Edinburgh. The title has been granted by his brother, King Charles, on the Prince's 59th birthday, and he'll hold that title for his lifetime. His wife, Sophie, becomes the Duchess of Edinburgh. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Acquare. Now, we've got lots to get through as ever, but there's only one place to start, and that is with Rishi Sunak, who has agreed to give France almost £500 million in his latest attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. The Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today before announcing the landmark 3-year deal, which will also see a new detention centre established in France.
Emmanuel and I share the same belief. Criminal gangs should not get to decide who comes to our countries. Within weeks of my coming into office, we agreed our largest ever small boats deal. And today we've taken our cooperation to an unprecedented level to tackle this shared challenge. We're announcing a new detention centre in northern France, a new command centre bringing our enforcement teams together in one place for the first time, and an extra 500 new officers patrolling French beaches, all underpinned by more drones and other surveillance technologies that will help ramp up the interception rate. And the legislation the UK has introduced this week supports this, because it's designed to break the business model of the criminal gangs and remove the pull factors bringing them to the Channel coast. Now, we will always comply with our international treaty obligations, but I am convinced that within them that we can do what is necessary to solve this shared problem and stop the boats.
An entente renewed, I think, were his words. Well, joining me in the studio now is our political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, so if you could just outline what this plan is, what was he saying?
So essentially, over the next 3 years, Britain is going to give around 500 million to France to help the mission of stopping the boats. And there are a number of ways they're going to do that. One of them is to pay for a special caucus, essentially, of French policemen to be patrolling the beaches, something that we've already invested in and it is beginning to show dividends, but perhaps not as much as some Conservative MPs might hope. Perhaps the biggest investment is in this migration detention centre in France. And this is the first time that Britain will be paying for a detention centre of this kind actually in France. Now, that is a big breakthrough because as the the ideal thing with this migrant problem is to stop the problem upstream. That's what we keep hearing from Keir Starmer, but he doesn't often give very much detail on what that involves. Well, a detention centre actually in France is certainly stopping the problem upstream. So there is definitely some good news there for the Prime Minister and for Britain at large. And, of course, perhaps the biggest bit of good news is the soft power element, because this warming of relationships between France and the UK is like nothing we've seen in about a decade. We used to have these French Anglo summits once a year. We now haven't had one for 5 years. The relationship between Britain and France had almost completely sort of broken down. And the fact that it's started up again on such firm footing, it seems, we saw countless hugs between the Prime Minister and the President, is really good news for Britain, because it also sets the ground, if you like, for the possibility of a returns deal for EU-wide UK returns deal for migrants who come to the UK to be returned to the EU. We're not there yet, but it feels like the ground is laid for that. So that's sort of the outline of the deal and the summit in general. Of course, for the French, the big win is £500 million, which shouldn't be dismissed lightly. In the last 7 years, Britain spent £232 million on helping the French police their beaches and attempting to intercept those migrant crossings before they get into the Channel. And in the next 3 years, we'll be spending £500 million. So that just gives you an idea of the scale of this new project. But essentially, Rishi Sunak will be pleased with how this afternoon went. The fact that he got the French president to say that it's an ambition to get a returns deal up and running between the EU and the UK is really very good news. And this migrant detention centre, which will be front page news tomorrow, definitely helps the Prime Minister in his mission to sort of show to the country that he's the one who has the capability and the willingness to stop the boats.
Potentially why Keir Starmer doesn't open his mouth and say anything, because he feels like all the policies have been stolen from him, but then he hasn't really got the power to do anything anyway. Thank you, Olivia. Let's have a chat with Rebecca Jane. She's the Deputy Leader of UKIP. The former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib told me an hour ago that this deal won't make any difference at all. Do you think he's right?
Absolutely. Firmly support Ben Habib, great guy, and he's completely correct. So Rishi Sunak, for me, is officially the worst negotiator in the world, and I'll tell you why. Who on earth gives millions of pounds to a country for a deal? That country then fails the deal, so I know what we'll do, we'll give them even more money. There is no returns that have been guaranteed with this deal, but he's already pledged 500 million, obviously £500 million of our money, and he's not even thought about the specific details of it. This detention centre that's apparently going to solve all of the problems, how many people can it hold? Because all I see from Rishi Sunak and from the Conservative Party is a lot of PR soundbites on their redemption tour. They constantly keep on saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We saw Suella do it earlier on this week, saying how they were going to stop illegal immigrants from coming to the country. But we saw Boris doing that a year ago with the Rwanda plan, and that's failed too. They don't look at the detail, but of course they're going to go cosy up to France and give them £500 million.
But some would say that it is a start. I mean, look, a warming of relationships has got to be a good thing, because ultimately there's been a stalemate for, 5 years? And in that time, we've seen this problem just escalate. I know we've had COVID and all the things that came in between, but a bad relationship with France is not a good thing. And what was alluded to is that this was a relationship or a partnership between the UK and the EU, because this is how it was framed. Surely that has to be better than an alternative of not having that relationship. And if there is a better alternative, what would yours be?
We don't have that relationship. What we have is giving them £500 million. They're not doing this because they want to help the relationship. They're doing it because they want the money out of us. The alternative is that we take this under our control, invest that money with ourselves. Unless we leave ECH out, we're never actually going to solve the problem. So actually, why don't we start looking at that first? Then we need to be holding people in offshore shipping containers that have been adapted to humane conditions and not letting them get to our shore. But relying on France, who consistently fail us over time and time again, is not going to solve this problem whatsoever.
Well, there was no mention of any safe and legal routes, which would have, I would like to have heard more about that. Do you think that more safe and legal routes will actually help to solve the problem, or is that just talking and actually was just a smokescreen for the reality that that's not going to work?
I think so. My problem is with the safe and legal routes suggestion. Britain is broken. We can't cope. You know, we are the size of our own ship. Our ship is sinking because you can't keep ploughing more and more people into our country. We don't have the services, we don't have the structures, we don't have the education, the healthcare, the housing for them. We can't really look at safe and legal routes right now. We have to have a complete block. We have to have other countries handle the situation, because right now we can't handle our own country, we can't handle our own people, and we can't support them. So safe and legal routes, lovely idea in the future, but right now that should not be our focus, I'm afraid.
But everything you said would allude to the fact that we're incapable of looking after ourselves, and therefore we're better off with the EU looking after us. So, you know, that's what I'm saying. You said that we can't have... But it sounds like, you know, we don't appear to have the ability to look after our own interests, and the way I'm looking at it, it doesn't look like our politicians are able to do that. But, I mean, what's your view?
You're correct. So we, right now, under Conservative leadership, we can't handle the situation. We need an alternative party to step in who actually have a tough stance and be able to properly handle this situation. Rishi Sunak has absolutely no idea on what he's doing. Every 10 minutes he changes his mind. We heard 3 weeks ago how he wanted to wave through 95% of applications for 5 countries. Rishi Sunak, the Conservatives, have no idea on what they're doing. But of course I'm going to say that because I'm the deputy leader of UKIP. We do know what we're doing. We have a better plan. We have a proper manifesto, and we're not scared to say the tough stuff. Rishi Sunak's more interested in who he can cosy up with, and I'll say no more about that.
Well, I mean, he's managed to cosy up to Ursula von der Leyen. I mean, you saw the pussycat eyes, and he's done the same thing with Macron. So, I mean, look, if it works, but we'll see. Rebecca Jane, thank you very much for talking to me. She's the deputy leader of UKIP. Well, joining me in the studio is Ivan Sampson, who is an immigration lawyer. Right, Ivan, this concept of the notion of being able to Rishi Sunak's current plan, which is to stop people from actually being able to claim asylum, and therefore be able to then hold them for, I think it's 28 days, and then send them back. Is this even a realistic proposition, seeing as they can't even get anyone to Rwanda?
No, look, this illegal immigration bill is illegal in itself. It breaks 3 articles within the European Convention on Human Rights. Both Article 2, right to life, Article 5, right to liberty, and Article 13 is to consider asylum applications properly. It also breaches the Refugee Convention because it makes irregular routes to claim asylum unlawful. So it's not going to get off the ground. I think what Mr. Sunak wants to do is to send somebody to Rwanda. He's got all his eggs in one basket. If he can do that, he believes that that will stop people from coming. I don't think it will.
Maybe he should go.
Maybe
he should go.
A bromance between Macron and Sunak is not the answer. The coastline that you have to patrol is too large. You cannot patrol it. The only thing that will work is what worked before. And what worked before was an agreement between between the UK and the EU, the Dublin Convention. That means anyone who hasn't claimed asylum in France and tries to claim asylum in the UK will be sent back. Now, if we have that type of agreement, that France agrees that if anybody comes on small boats will get sent back, why would you set off from France? If you know that you're going to be sent back to France, if you come across, why would you set off?
You'd think that the French would be up for creating a similar agreement, even outside the fact that we're not within the EU, because that would be good for them as well. It would take away the draw to their borders. So I'm wondering why they are sort of skirting around the edges and coming up. Is it the money, do you think?
Look, France has shown that it hasn't protected its border. We've seen French police officers ushering people onto the boats. You've seen those images. The deal needs to be done with the EU itself, not just with France. Did you know that for every 10,000 person in the UK, we have 7 asylum applications? In the EU, it's 14. It's double.
Yeah, but,
we're 16th on the list of asylum seekers.
But a lot of those countries, and I hear people make comparisons, a lot of those countries, for example, people comparing us to France, and these countries are vastly bigger than ours. So
but we're
I don't
talking
think
per
it's
10,000. So it's per population. No, look, you need an agreement with the EU that if you come to France, on the borders, you must claim asylum in France. Once you've done that and you're a refugee, you can come to the UK afterwards if you've got family. If you haven't, you can't. And the EU should disperse those people evenly across the EU states.
Well, what's stopping them from... Why do you think they don't want to do that? And Macron did allude to it, that this is not a deal with just France, it's a deal with the EU. That's what he said. So that's presumably a similar... That would be kind of where we're heading with this, do you think?
Well, it's politically... it's a political jeopardy because nobody... Look, France doesn't want asylum seekers. We don't have an asylum system as of 7th of March. From the 7th of March, you cannot claim asylum in the UK if you come on an irregular route. So we are actually de facto outside the Refugee Convention as of the 7th of March.
But OK, fair enough. What's the big deal about being outside that? Who cares? So what?
The harm that it causes to the most vulnerable people.
No, but if you're vulnerable, you cannot find £7,000 or whatever it is to get on a boat and come across. Look, I get it. We have deals with the places where we know there are definitely wars, and we've created safe and legal routes. But you're saying the most vulnerable people, a lot of the people I'm seeing on those boats, I'm not being funny, but I'm using my eyes, a lot of them don't look that vulnerable.
Fine, and we've got the law to send them back. Well, let's do that.
Well,
let's not punish genuine asylum seekers.
We're not doing that, though. We're looking at people who are coming across on boats, who have spent a lot of money to do that, to come to this country. They are people who have money and means and connections to be able to do that. So we need to stop that because it's actually harming the people who are genuine. It's making less space for those people, and that's who we should be focusing on, not the ones coming above.
There is no space for those people now.
Well,
you've taken away that space.
In what way have they taken away that
Because
space?
if you come on an irregular route now, you cannot claim asylum in the UK. You can't do it.
Well, no, you can't. When you're saying irregular route, what do you mean?
I mean coming across without directly coming from your country. The only way you can claim asylum as of the 7th of March is if you come directly from your country to the UK. And that's only you can do that by a safe and safe legal routes. Even if you come with a fake passport, which you could before, you can't do that.
Well, you shouldn't be able to come with a fake passport. I'm not going to...
No, you can, under the Refugee Convention. In fact...
that should be taken out of the Convention. What on earth is that about?
People are fleeing persecution for their lives.
Right.
So if they use a fake passport,
just come with...
they're saving their lives, and that's why they're doing it.
So you're saying that people should... The Refugee Convention allows people to come with fake passports to this
Absolutely.
country. OK. Well, I think I'd probably look at that and think, OK, but maybe there's some other way of doing that, because fake passports I don't think is a great thing. But obviously, I don't know the full detail of it. There's obviously other implications, and if I spend more time, I might see that as a good thing. But so what if we're outside this convention?
It means that we will not accept refugees in this country.
Well, it doesn't. Could we not have our own convention? We accept refugees, but we may not. We might change the rules so that we can have the...
If we had that position in World War II, we wouldn't have accepted many of the Jewish people that came to live here, which we accepted, quite rightly.
Yeah, no,
And you're saying that we should not accept anyone at all.
No, did I say those words?
No, say, well, if we're outside the convention...
I didn't say those words.
We won't.
No, why couldn't we create our own convention, though, and decide how we will deal with it? I'm just asking, are there any other countries outside the Refugee Convention?
If it's left to us...
But are there?
Belarus, Russia is that. So we'd be in with those lot.
OK, anybody else?
Not that I'm aware of that's any significance. Okay. So we'd be in the same camp as Putin and Belarus.
Yeah, but before the situation, were they inside or outside the convention?
No, they've never been. They do not accept asylum applications.
OK, so part of this convention is accepting refugees. OK, so let's say for we stay within the convention. Surely you should be able to carve elements of the niche that suit where you are and your country, so that within that convention you can stay. But, I mean, it feels like an immovable thing, just like when we were in the EU, where you couldn't actually kind of have your own take on something. There has to be
Let me give you an example.
Is there some leeway in this?
We've carved... Let me give you an example. We have carved it out. We've accepted 154,000 people from Ukraine.
Yeah, but I think we would have done that in or out of a convention.
Since 2014 to 2021, that's less than all of asylum applications of any country than the amount of Ukrainians we've accepted.
Yes, but don't you have to look at the situation and the circumstance of the country itself?
The circumstances, they're white and they're brown.
No.
That's the different circumstances.
Hang on, no. What are you saying?
That's the difference.
So you're saying we've accepted more Ukrainians because they're white than... I'm going to stop you on that because I think that's disingenuous.
Well,
because if you look at the amount of refugees or people that we've taken in terms of immigration and legal immigration, we have taken in more people who are of African and Indian and all other than we have in this country. If you're just going, so we have taken in a lot more, and so I don't really think that's a fair comparison.
Robert Jenrick on television said a few days ago. Robert Jenrick on TV said that we are close to these people. We have a lot in common with them.
But
with Ukrainians, they're our neighbours. They're human beings, just like Afghans, and just like Iranians,
that doesn't mean...
and just like people come from Iraq and Iran, who are being persecuted.
But you're equating that with colour, and I don't think that's fair, because, as I said, we've taken in over 1 million people who've come from other parts of the world, not necessarily from Europe. And actually, being within the EU, in a sense, we were taking on white people without any sort of checks and balances, whereas now we're not prioritising people who are in Europe, we're prioritising people from all over the world, and actually being out of the EU enables us to trade with Africa and all the other parts of the world, rather than being forced to be, or making sure that we put ourselves more in closer proximity to...
I don't see any homes for Afghans, and I certainly don't see any homes for Syrians, but we have homes for Ukraine. Look, I'm not knocking you. I think what we did with Ukraine was right. It was the right thing to do.
These are different schemes based on different situations. I think it's totally disingenuous to compare.
Let me give you the figures.
What kind of scheme?
Let me give you the figures.
I'll take the figures. Go on.
So, Syrians, and other countries from the Middle East, they account for 40,000 only of asylum applications. That's a fraction of the number of Ukrainians we've taken, and also from Hong Kong, which, again, is a visa system.
Have you seen what's going on in Ukraine at the moment? Look, I just don't think that the whole thing, equating it with colour and things, is relevant. I think you have to look at the situation, and Ukraine is being bombed to smithereens with, 40 million people living in that country. It's a massive country with a huge landmass. It's no surprise that we would have taken more people
Yemen
from
has been
Ukraine.
bombed to smithereens.
Yes, how long has Yemen been being bombed to smithereens?
For a number of years.
Yeah, and over that time, we've taken on a lot of people who want to come here from Yemen. Let's be fair.
Yeah, I think you need to read the asylum statistics, because I think you'll find, as I said to you, between 2014 and 2021, we took less refugees, entire world, than the number of Ukrainians we took in 2022. Those are the facts.
I appreciate...
Those are government figures.
Yeah, I think it's slightly patronising if you say I should go and read it. What I'm saying is, just on a layman's terms and a normal, as somebody who's looking at it, is that there is a horrendous war happening in Ukraine. We can see it in front of our eyes.
No, I agree with you.
We've made a situation so people from Ukraine can
I'm
get
all
here.
for
I don't
the
think
Ukrainian...
it's fair to then say, well, in Yemen, we haven't taken more Yemen and this and that, because actually we're just trying to deal with each situation as it comes, and, you know, we're trying to do the right thing. Right, well, anyway, thank you very much. It's great to chat to you. I enjoyed that. Hope you enjoyed that. Right, thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying it too. That is, of course, Ivan Sampson. He's an immigration lawyer. Right, well, we're all sick of hearing bad news on the economy, aren't you? But our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has got some good news. Yes, he's going to bring us that in just a moment. This is GB News. I'm Nana Aquin.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Just coming up to 4:30, this is GB News. Now, in the face of severe global challenges, the UK economy has proved more resilient than many expected, but there is still a long way to go. The words of the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt this morning as the economy shows signs of bouncing back. GDP, the sum total of all transactions in the economy, unexpectedly grew 0.3% in January, following a 0.5% contraction the month before. And here to break it down for us and make some sense of what I just said, because I read it and had no idea, is economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. Yeah, you know, you read something, you think, what the hell is what I go on?
You can do this. Bear with me, right? Bear with me.
Explain.
There are these numbers called GDP, Gross Domestic Product. And what it means is that all the transactions in the economy, you add everything up that happens in a particular month, and that's the amount of GDP. And the amount of GDP goes up from one month to the other, that's growth or anti-growth. And actually, even though a lot of people have been saying the UK economy is on its uppers, the Bank of England, the Treasury, the Office of Budget Responsibility, they've all been saying, haven't they, we're going into recession, it's going to be really gloomy, and all the rest of it. And I have to come on and I have to report that stuff. So it's really nice for me to come on a Friday afternoon now and report some numbers out this morning, official numbers, that are actually pretty good. We're seeing the green shoots of economic recovery. And I've put them on a graphic for you, Nana. So GB News radio listeners can bear with us. There you go. The economy returns to growth. GDP in December 2022 fell. It contracted by 0.5%. Almost all economists, except yours truly, thought that contraction was going to continue. But look, in January 2023, the latest figures show that GDP actually increased 0.3%. That's not a bad monthly increase. And if you break those numbers down, Nana, it is a bit of a mixed picture, but the service sector there, that accounts for a big chunk of the economy. That's 0.3% growth. Transport and storage up 1.6% in January.
We haven't had any movement at all. They've all been on strike.
No, but the thing is, there were strikes in December and there were many fewer strikes in January. And so we got back up. And also a lot of freight happened. You had a lot of shipping going on, a lot of logistics. Those lockdown supply chain problems are really now starting to ease. So you had a big increase in transport and storage. But look, their production, that fell. That's mainly manufacturers. They're still suffering with high energy costs. Their commercial activity down 0.3% and construction down 1.7%. That's because the housing market's rocky, so a lot of the big house builders are just sort of... They do go slows anyway to keep prices high, but now they're doing an even bigger go slow. But look, this is much, much better in the round than almost anyone thought it would be. I'm not saying there's not still a cost of living crisis. I'm not saying that households aren't still suffering with their shopping baskets, their energy bills, firms suffering as well, but it's better than expected. And what that means is in the budget on Wednesday, Jeremy Hunt should have a bit more money to play with because there's been a bit more growth, a bit more tax revenue. He hasn't had to spend so much on energy subsidies for households and firms because wholesale energy prices have come down. And that means there may be room for, if not some tax cuts, then maybe he can shelve some tax rises, and there may be a bit more room. You won't want to talk about this, though, money for wage settlements to settle some of those industrial disputes. So I hope that's not too complicated, but it's actually pretty good news. There is light at the end of the economic tunnel, in my view. I've been saying for weeks on GB News, you can see the green shoots of recovery coming through. And these official GDP numbers, which came out this morning, I've been talking about them here on GB News all day today, they show that there is indeed signs of a decent economic recovery.
Well, let's hope that Jeremy Hunt doesn't suffocate them with a 25% tax on businesses. Thank you very much, Liam. That's Liam Halligan. He's our business and economics editor. Right, there's still lots more to come between now and 5. Find out why Prince Edward has received an extra special 59th birthday present from King Charles. And I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to be discussing whether Gary Lineker should be sacked after his latest shocking outbursts on Twitter. But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Anna, thank you. Good afternoon. And this is the latest from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has agreed to give France almost £500 million over the next 3 years in an attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. The Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today. The pair then announced a landmark deal, one which includes a new detention centre to be established in France. Speaking after the first UK-French summit for 5 years, Mr Sunak said today marks a new beginning in the relations between the two countries.
I do believe that the right way to approach this migrations is a broader space. Western Balkans, European Union, and not just France and UK, have to work closely together in order precisely to dismantle these groups and to be more efficient regarding this phenomenon.
The Labour leader has discussed his plans to prioritise Scottish innovation to boost the economy. Sir Keir Starmer is in Glasgow with Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. He says Scotland's creativity has been held back by governments at Holyrood and Westminster. Drivers have been left stranded for hours this morning with heavy snowfall holding up traffic. Storm Larissa hit the UK overnight, causing flights to be suspended and rail services delayed as fallen trees blocked some lines. The Met Office has yellow warnings for snow and ice in place for parts of the UK over the weekend, and people are being urged to only travel if necessary. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Nana.
Welcome back to GB News. I'm Nana Akwe in for Patrick Christys. Now, the trial of the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell is continuing at Manchester Crown Court. Thomas Cashman is charged with the murder of Olivia, who was shot inside her home in Liverpool last August. Now, Cashman has also been charged with attempted murder, wounding with intent, and also possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life. He denies the charges. Sophie Reaper reports from outside Manchester Crown Court.
Well, this morning, the court heard from a witness who can't be named for legal reasons. That was via a pre-recorded police interview in which the witness recalled exactly what they remember from that night back in August of last year. The witness began by saying they were asleep, but they remember feeling someone tapping on their leg. They then heard someone saying, it's Tommy, repeatedly. The witness said, I thought it was a nightmare. They then recalled Thomas Cashman stuttering with his hands on his head, saying he'd been told by a source that someone was coming for him. The witness told the police he's went to get them before they got him, and later that he'd said something along the lines of, lad, I've done Joey. The jury then heard that Mr. Cashman reportedly asked the witness for some clothing, to which they obliged, giving him a pair of navy blue tracksuit bottoms. Later in the interview, the witness confirmed that a pair of tracksuit bottoms recovered from Mr. Cashman's sister's house were in fact the same pair they had given them on the night of the incident. Finally, the witness recounted their anger with Mr. Cashman, saying to the police, "I want to see Tommy and ask him why he chose to come to my house. He's jeopardised everyone else's life just to save his own back." Now, court has concluded here in Manchester for today. It's due to resume again on Monday morning. We're expecting to hear the other half of the evidence from this witness.
As of course, Sophie Reaper. A Christian preacher has had his conviction for misgendering a trans woman overturned. His lawyer is going to talk us through that extraordinary case. I'm Anna Quinn. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
And this Saturday, we've got an exclusive interview with the Chancellor.
I'm not going to have another leadership campaign.
Well, never again. You might do.
No, never again.
We'll be asking him about corporation tax rises, energy prices. We'll also be asking him about his time as Secretary of State for Health and Chairman of the Health Select Committee, and whether or not we should have had such a fierce lockdown.
It's an interview that you can't miss, so join us this Saturday, 10 to 12 on GB News, the People's Channel.
It's fast approaching 43 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Aquare. Now, Prince Edward has been given the title Duke of Edinburgh, which honours the wishes of the late Queen and Prince Philip. The announcement has come on Edward's 59th birthday. And the decision by King Charles means that Edward's wife Sophie, who's been known as the Countess of Wessex, is now the Duchess of Edinburgh. The new Duke and Duchess are visiting Edinburgh today. So with me at the moment is Grant Harold. He's a former royal butler. Grant, former royal butler to King Charles. I couldn't resist. I do it every time. I know I shouldn't. I should stop that. I should grow up. Talk to me about this. This is great because, as I learned from Michael Cole, Wessex does not exist. It's a made-up place.
Do you know, it was interesting because when they created the title, obviously, I think it was arranged at that point that later he would get the title Duke of Edinburgh, because obviously Wessex was created by the Queen for that at the point when he married Sophie, obviously Wessex. And now the titles have obviously been changed, which a lot of people kept saying to me, do you think it wouldn't happen? Because obviously the Queen passed in September, but the arrangement always was, it was after both the Queen and the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, once they had both passed, obviously you need a bit of time to kind of go past before these titles were passed on, but it was the wishes of the Queen, and I think it's really nice that the title gets to continue. And to be really exact, it's the fourth creation of the title, so it's been around since 1726.
Well, let's be honest, who else could he give it to anyway? Because there's nobody else, really. There aren't any others. You can't give it to Andrew.
No, well, interestingly enough, Queen Victoria gave, traditionally the second son always was given the title Duke of York, which I only discovered today. But Queen Victoria gave her second son, instead of Duke of York, she created him Duke of Edinburgh. But of course, in this instance, the Duke of Edinburgh was already held by the late Prince Philip. And some listeners and viewers might not realise that our late Queen was a Duchess of Edinburgh. That was her title. She was the Duchess of Edinburgh before she became Queen. But as you said, there's nobody really for the title to be passed on to now. So it was that's it. You know, the titles have been given out, and that's it done, if you like.
Well, listen, Grant, thank you so much. We'll come back to you very shortly. But we have some breaking news on Gary Lineker. Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement is reached on his social media use. BBC statement, it follows an Impartiality row over comments he made criticising the government's new asylum policy. Now, yesterday's news that the government should be... Well, let's get back to Grant Harold now. I think we were talking to Grant. Let's go back to Grant. So we were talking to Grant Harold with regard to the royal family. And, of course, so just some breaking news. Sorry, Grant, I had to go straight back into there and just discuss what's happening with Gary Lineker. I won't ask for your reaction, but I might do at the end. But let's carry on with what you were saying about the royal family. So, yes, sorry, carry on.
No, so I was just saying that it's not surprising this has happened. And as far as the royal titles go, this was the last thing to be done. And a lot of people were expecting this. And obviously it's taking place because they thought, what better time than, I think it's been described as a birthday gift from the king to his brother. So it's probably the right time to do it. But as I said, enough time's passed. I can't believe this now. It's over 7 months since the Queen passed. So I think they obviously felt that was an adequate amount of time to pass for the title to be passed on.
Well, I think they're rightly so, they deserve it, because, frankly, those two work extremely hard and quietly behind the scenes, and they don't make a big old song and dance about it, and they don't whinge about the wonderful position that they've got.
They do, and interesting enough, Nana, many years ago, they were the first two royals that I actually before they were married, I met both of them and thought they were absolutely fantastic. And interesting, as you said, they're very hard-working royals. I mean, when you look at the analytics of members of the royal family, I think Princess Anne was always kind of the top of that list, closely followed by the king. But obviously, the then Heir and Countess of Wessex were equally hard-working and were very, very close, as were other members of the family, but very close to the late Queen and Prince Philip. You know, they had a very strong bond, and Prince Philip got on really well with both of them and with Sophie. And I think, you know, I'm sure this was, as I said, it was already planned, but I'm sure they were really happy with the decision that they would carry on that title. And it is nice to see that it's going to carry on. And the other thing to quickly mention, there's another part to this, because their son, who is now the Earl of Wessex. It's possible that when he turns 18, that from what I understand is that the title Prince and his sister Princess could be passed on to them, because the arrangement was made for them was that when they turned 18, it's something that will then be reviewed. So we could see their children being created HRHs as well as their grandchildren of the king. So there's more to come, if I could say that.
Well, and just briefly, your reaction on the news. Of course, Harry and Meghan then officially gave the titles to their children, even though I would have thought that the king might have done it that way, and there might have been a bit more pomp and ceremony. But the Harkles did it in the only way they know how, in their Montecito mansion, in some sort of, I don't know. But so, what's your take on this?
Well, it's interesting, Anna, because they have said it's their birthright. Now, yes, it's what George V created, was that the children and grandchildren of the monarch get the titles. That's absolutely correct. But to say it's the birthright, it's really the king's decision. It's down to, obviously, it's got to be put to him, and he's got to agree to it. And he's decided to follow what his great-grandfather put into place. He always wants to continue that. I also see it, Nana, once again, an olive branch that's been offered, and kind of hope that maybe this is received and this helps kind of mend these wounds. But Nana, as we all know, you just don't know what's going to happen next. But I'm hoping that this gesture might actually help improve things. But who knows? You can't tell.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they did this thing where they preempt things instead of doing it in the nice official way and accept. I don't know why they keep doing that. Grant Harold, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Nana.
Thank you so much. Right, and just to recap on that breaking news, Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement is reached on his social media use. A BBC statement said that it follows an impartiality row over comments he made criticising the government's new asylum policy. So, I mean, this is huge news. It broke a few moments ago. He's stepping back. And, of course, Gary Lineker did say that he would be presenting Match of the Day, that we would see him on Saturday, but that is not the case. Now, this was the tweet that Lineker sent on Tuesday, which caused such controversy. There, and this is me, I'm quoting it now, "There is no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is most dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s, and I'm out of order." So, of course, he was criticised by the Prime Minister, and he was criticised by Keir Starmer as well. And other people, other Jewish faith groups have come out and criticised him as well, saying that the analogy, which, of course, 30s Germany was Nazi Germany, really actually diminishes the reality of that time, and that he really shouldn't be making such comparisons. And Gary seemed to think that it was quite a casual retort, and that actually he, what he said, he cannot believe the amount of coverage that it's getting. But I suspect also that BBC does have a duty of care, particularly with regard to impartiality. And I know people do say, oh, he's a sports presenter. But as Tim Davies said previously, when he made another previous tweet, which they did say had broken impartiality guidelines, Tim Davies had said that the reason they did that was because he is a very prominent BBC presenter and he has an extra responsibility. So just to recap, the Gary Lineker will not be on air on Saturday presenting Match of the Day until he comes up with, until they've discussed his impartiality and also his tweets. We'll come up, we'll talk about more of that at 5 o'clock. But moving on to this story, a Christian preacher who was convicted and reported to the government's counter-terrorism programme after misgendering a trans woman has won his appeal. David McConnell was convicted of causing harassment, alarm or distress following an incident in June 2021. He's had his conviction quashed yesterday. David McConnell's lawyer, Michael Phillips, joins me now. So really good to talk to you, actually, Michael, because this is a thing that people say, misgendering, as though it's some illegal thing that you have done. Is it illegal to misgender someone to start with?
I would certainly argue it is not. There is no law in the country which says that you cannot misgender somebody. You have to use their preferred pronouns. There is no law which exists which says that. And so it's quite frightening that we're in a situation now that very often we have laws which on their at face value are good laws. They could be used in appropriate ways for drunks coming out of a football match or out of a pub, and there's a public order situation. But for these laws to be misapplied in the way in which they have been misapplied on this particular occasion and on other occasions is extremely disturbing.
So what law was it that they used then to even take this any further? Because to me it seems absolutely ludicrous that could get to a point where it's actually going into a court of law.
It is the Public Order Act, 1986. And so Section 4A of the Public Order Act says that if you use threatening, abusive or insulting words or behaviour which causes harassment, alarm or distress, and you do so intentionally, you can be guilty of an offence. And so, in fact, the word insulting was taken out of Section 5, but for some reason it's been left in Section 4A, which is quite concerning, because I think that, how can it ever be a crime to insult anybody? But the judge said, well, look, it's no crime to insult somebody unless you do it intentionally. So if, in this particular case, my client was found to have said something and the judge said it was insulting, however, he was just simply quoting from the Bible, and he was talking about his faith, which he genuinely believed in, and so in those circumstances, it could not be held to be a crime. But the fact of the matter is, it's frightening, because it's obvious that the crowd believed he should be arrested, the police believed he should be prosecuted, the Crown Prosecution Service believed that this was the right thing to do, and also a judge in the Magistrates Court as well believed that he was guilty of an offence. So it took going up to the Crown Court, which on appeal, for them to realise that this was not an offence.
What an amazing, incredible waste of time. I mean, I'm sorry, but it just seems like we're wasting our time. I mean, if you've ever seen the family courts and the mess that is in, the fact that they've actually got time to be dealing with situations like this is clearly, you could actually misgender someone by accident, and then for it to go, for this whole ricochet to happen, for it to end up in the Crown Court seems ludicrous, actually, in my view. What about the flag? There was an LGBT flag outside the police station. Am I correct? What was that about?
Yeah, so in fact, David went up to the police station where he had been arrested, he'd been taken a couple of years ago, and he went to revisit it. And outside the police station, they had this pride flag, which, is a political symbol. And it's very concerning, because a lot of people, don't necessarily agree with the ideology which is behind pride, And it's when this isn't necessarily something about LGBT people, because there are many people who I know that well-known people who will say, no, pride is one thing and being LGBT is another thing. There are people who are heterosexual who support pride, and there are people who are homosexual who don't like pride. So it is a political movement, and to align yourself so closely with it is to alienate a large part of society who do not feel comfortable with some of the things that particular movement has stood for.
You see, the thing with it, as you said, it's political, and political statements should not be made by police, because it's like taking the knee, it's like rainbow laces, it's all that stuff. I don't want to see it in my policing. I want to know that if somebody burgles my house, they'll be there and they'll catch the criminals. I don't want to see them showing how political they are or how much they have affinity towards a certain cause. I just want them to remain completely neutral and get on with doing the job. So what's the upshot of this then? So your client has been let go. This is nothing further. There's no further action, or may it move to something else? Are they trying again, or what's the outcome?
No, I mean, for this particular offence, he has been acquitted. That said, he can't be prosecuted for it again, and which is wonderful for him. But the thing is that it has a chilling effect on him, and even in court, people are afraid to use non-preferred pronouns because they're afraid that they may get into trouble with the judge, they may be in contempt of court, and so and I'm sure when he goes out next time, he's going to be fearful. He's going to be fearful that somebody else is going to make a report to the police, and he's going to have to go through this whole palaver again for being on bail and having to do community service, which is then overturned and so on. It's a lot of strain on an individual, and you can see that.
Well, listen, Michael, you need to make it your, you need to make it your mission to take out silly language in all this legal stuff and stop this going on. Hopefully we'll come back to you, and hopefully you sorted it out. That's David McConnell's lawyer. Thank you very much. Really good to talk to you. Michael Phillips. I was right. It is Michael. Right, now, a reminder of the huge breaking news that we brought to you a short time ago. Gary Lineker will not present Match of the Day until an agreement is reached on his social media use. On Tuesday, Lineker compared the government's migration policy to Germany in the 1930s. The BBC said it considered Lineker's recent social media activity to be a breach of our guidelines. Stay with us. I'm Nana Aquid. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Crack, I thought there was another sting. You caught me. Good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akwe, in for Patrick Christys. Now, so much happening. Gary Lineker, breaking news. Gary Lineker will not be presenting Match of the Day this Saturday after a tweet which he sent on Tuesday was seen to be breaching the BBC guidelines when he compared the immigration policy to Nazi Germany. Then on the way, we'll also be looking at Sunak's agreement with Macron in an Anglo-French agreement. They had a discussion this afternoon in the summit where they came up with a plan which would cost us here in the UK £500 million, that's £500 million, but it would also see a detention centre in France, plus a specific police force to police migration. And looking at the weather, as you know, all across the country, there is the big freeze, and we'll be going all over the country looking at how the weather is affecting them. And in particular, if you have an electric car, how does the big freeze affect you? Will an electric car even work in the big freeze? And of course, it is the 59th birthday of Prince Edward, and he's been bestowed the honour which was given to him by the late Queen and Prince Philip, the title of Duke of Edinburgh, and Sophie becomes the Duke or Duchess even of Edinburgh. So that's on the way. As ever, get in touch in the usual way. GBviews at gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBnews. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you and good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 5. Your top story this afternoon on GB News. Some breaking news in the last few minutes. The BBC says Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement has been reached on his social media usage. It follows comments he made on Twitter criticising the government's new asylum policy. He likened the language used to that of 1930s Germany. Well, in a statement, the broadcaster said Mr. Lineker would step back until there's an agreed and clear position on his use of social media. They added, "We have never said that Gary can't have a view on issues that matter to him, but he should keep well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies." Well, Rishi Sunak has agreed to give France almost £500 million over the next 3 years in an attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. The Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today before announcing the landmark deal, which will see a new detention centre established in France. The joint news conference followed the first bilateral summit between the two countries in 5 years. Mr. Sunak says the new illegal migrant legislation introduced this week supports this new deal.
Announcing a new detention centre in northern France, a new command centre bringing our enforcement teams together in one place for the first time, and an extra 500 new officers patrolling French beaches. All underpinned by more drones and other surveillance technologies that will help ramp up the interception rate. And the legislation the UK has introduced this week supports this, because it's designed to break the business model of the criminal gangs and remove the pull factors bringing them to the Channel coast.
Well, the French will also contribute significantly to funding, with President Macron saying this isn't simply a deal between France and the UK.
I do believe that the right way to approach these migrations is a broader space. Western Balkans, European Union, and not just France and UK, have to work closely together in order precisely to dismantle these groups and to be more efficient regarding this phenomenon.
The UK economy grew by 0.3% in January. The latest data from the Office for National Statistics shows a bounce back from the fall seen in December last year. The Chancellor says the return to growth proves the economy is more resilient than many expected. Ahead of his spring budget on Wednesday, he added there's still a long way to go. The Labour leader has discussed his plans to prioritise Scottish innovation to boost the economy. Sir Keir Starmer is in Glasgow with Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. He says Scotland's creativity has been held back by governments at Holyrood and Westminster.
What I want is an economy in Scotland that is bursting forward. We have a mission for the next Labour government to have the highest sustained growth in the G7. For Scotland, that would take us hugely forward with the jobs of the future, the skills of the future. At the moment, the problem we've got is that productivity is low, living standards are low, start-ups in Scotland are failing at a greater rate than elsewhere in the UK. This is, in a Scotland, has a great history when it comes to our economy. So we want to turn that around.
Drivers were left stranded for hours this morning with heavy snowfall holding up traffic. Storm Larissa hit the UK overnight, causing flights to be suspended and rail services delayed as fallen trees blocked some lines. The Met Office has yellow warnings for snow and ice in place for parts of the UK over the weekend, and people are being urged to only travel if necessary. Hamburg police have named the man behind a mass shooting at a Jehovah's Witness hall in the city as German national Philip F. At least 8 people died, including a woman and her unborn baby. Police say the gunman acted alone and later took his own life. His motives are still unknown. They say the 35-year-old was a former member of the Jehovah's Witness community. He had no criminal record and possibly suffered from mental illness. And Prince Edward has been named as the new Duke of Edinburgh. The title has been granted by his brother King Charles on the Prince's 59th birthday and will be held for his lifetime. His wife, Sophie, becomes the Duchess of Edinburgh. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
Good afternoon. It's 7 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Acquare. And we start with breaking news in the last 20 minutes. Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement has been made regarding his social media use. Now, the news follows an Impartiality row over comments Lineker made criticising the government's new asylum policy. He compared the language used by Suella Braverman to Germany in the 1930s. In a statement, the BBC said the BBC has decided that he will step back from presenting Match of the Day until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media. When it comes to leading our football and sports coverage, Gary is second to none. We have never said that Gary should be an opinion-free zone or that he can't have a view on issues that matter to him. But we have said that he should keep well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies. Well, joining me now is Akhil Ahmed, former head of religion and ethics at BBC and Channel 4. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, is this a welcome decision by the BBC?
I think it's a decision that I'm not surprised that they've taken, because obviously they do need to have a policy with regards to Gary and not just Gary, but in general, everybody else. Because what you've got to remember is Gary Lineker is not a news and current affairs presenter. He's a presenter of sports programming, in particular football programming. So it seems quite strange that, you know, he would be held to the same kind of level of scrutiny that you would actually hold a current affairs presenter to. But because this is a fast-moving area with regards to what people expect from people with regards to social media and the kind of things that can be said and the mistakes you can make and the tone where you can get wrong, that I understand there needs to be a conversation. But I think we have to be clear about this as well, which is he's not a current affairs presenter. So therefore, if he has an opinion, then he is entitled to have an opinion. The problem becomes, how is that opinion then linked to with regards to his role with the BBC? Now, he is a freelance presenter, remember, Nana. He's not actually full-time with the BBC. He does work for other broadcasters as well. So that is the reason why I think that this is a welcome conversation, not just about Gary, but about the whole of presenting and workforce as well for the BBC in terms of what they can and can't say.
Well, Akhil, I'm going to say that that's actually what you said there slightly incorrect. And you know why I know this? Because I worked at the BBC as a presenter, and I know that actually they brought everything into closer alignment. So whether you were sports or whether you were news, you were still bound by a similar code. And they closed the gap. And I know this. Sorry, let me finish because I listened to you. They closed the gap, and they closed the gap in the time I was there, and they closed the gap on me. So radio presenters were able to say stuff a bit more than news presenters and so on and so forth, but then they closed the gap. And Tim Davies specifically said that actually he didn't care who you are, he's going to make sure that the BBC remains completely impartial. He did a big old speech in 2021, and we all know that, and Gary knows that. And in fact, we all had impartiality training, and the reason I left the BBC was because I couldn't speak, and I too, like Gary, was a freelancer, yet was forced into IR35, and I was not allowed to speak either. So he is bound by the same rules as everybody else.
Within reason, not totally, because obviously there is no impartial. It's a very different level of impartiality when you're a news and current affairs presenter. No, I understand exactly what you're saying, which is why I think it's the right thing to do, to have a wider conversation, because it's not simply possible. I don't think it's possible to say that everybody is the same when you work for an organisation like the BBC or any kind of major organisation of that nature, because not everybody does the same kind of role and not everybody has the same kind of contract. That's why I believe that they have to have this conversation now and understand that in going forward, you'll have nobody working for you if you're not allowed to have an opinion in some form or other.
Exactly the point. Which is why I left the BBC, because I couldn't have an opinion, yet I was not, but I was a freelancer, and they certainly weren't paying me enough to not work for anybody else. So in a sense, in my view, it was almost like a form of constructive dismissal, because you had to go, because otherwise you'd never make up enough money. And so you had to leave because you couldn't have an opinion on any other channel. And actually, I myself lost 2 shows because I said something on a different channel that the BBC weren't happy with. So I lost something, and I wasn't news, as it were, and I was kind of more radio at the time. I'd done news and I'd done all that. So I welcome the conversation, but Gary knows that he shouldn't have been speaking in that way. Surely you must admit that what they were saying in terms of political stature, because it sounds like, if you imagine a lot of, it's sort of like the BBC feel like they have a left-wing bias, and do you feel that they perhaps felt pressure from politicians?
I think that there's an element of that, because I don't think there's, if you follow Gary on Twitter, I actually follow him on Twitter. If you follow him on Twitter, he has an opinion on a lot of things. Now, you can ask the same question about, say, another Gary Neville, who's on, not on BBC, but on Sky and ITV. I think he's done ITV work as well. I mean, he's very opinionated. There's no getting around it. So it's actually interesting why Gary Lineker would be picked on more than, say, Gary Neville.
Well, because he works for the BBC. No, because he works for the BBC, which is funded by the licence payer.
That's my point. There are lots of people who work. You know, Andrew Neil was very opinionated, and actually, I follow him as well, and I like a lot of what he says. But he's also opinionated. So the fact of the matter is, you're right. They do think there's a left-wing bias because of Gary's particular opinions.
Well, Tim Davie admitted it. Yeah.
Well, no, they may think that. I'm not saying they do. I don't speak on their behalf, Nana. I'm saying they may think that. I can understand that, but I keep going back to that central point, which is the system as it stands has to be looked at, because everybody is on social media. When I was the head of religion, I wasn't on social media for obvious reasons, which was it would have made my life a misery, because when I say something on social media, there's a bunch of people that will jump out of nowhere and say, and I don't say many things that are controversial anyway, simply because of a lot of the roles that I have. So I'm not here saying that it should be a free-for-all. I'm simply saying, if you present news programmes, I think it's one thing. If you present other programmes like sport or cookery or whatever it is, I think there needs to be a bit of leeway here. I think there needs to be, you can have a conversation about what he actually said, but should he be allowed to say it? In my opinion, of course, because he's not a news
No, he shouldn't.
That's what we need to address.
No, he shouldn't be allowed to say that, because he also has a responsibility. And remember, he's working for literally, it's pretty much a state-owned broadcaster, right? So why on earth should we be paying for him to give us his opinions? If you want to work for the BBC, that's fine, but you must accept the rule. And if the rule is that they are impartial, then so must you be. If you don't want to work for there are other organisations to work for. Thank you very much, Shakil. Really good to talk to you. That's Shakil Ahmed. He's a former head of religion and ethics at the BBC and at Channel 4. Right, well, joining me now is former Chief Advisor to Ofcom, Martin Campbell. Martin, thank you very much for joining me. The BBC guidelines, in many respects, seem somewhat almost unworkable in this modern age. Do you think that perhaps they need to have a rethink, and that perhaps people like Gary should be able to make comments on political issues?
No, I don't. I couldn't disagree more with your previous guest. The BBC are their own worst enemy. They should have acted well before now. And to say that they're going to work for an agreement with him, I mean, who's employing who here? It's ridiculous. He's paid, what is it, £1.3 million? So
£1.35 million. Yeah.
Right. Whether people like it or not, I don't care whether he's a freelance or not. He's getting that money from the BBC, and the BBC is the state broadcaster, and therefore, as the highest paid person there, he is the face of the BBC. And why they've hesitated, I really don't know.
Well, it feels like, I mean, I'm just putting it out there that I don't understand why they would hesitate. They didn't hesitate with me. When I said something they didn't like, they told me in no uncertain terms. Then when I did something again that they didn't like, they told me again. And I knew I was on, I thought to myself, I need to leave, because I am somebody who cannot sit there with no opinion, which is why I'm not there. And I'm very proud and grateful to be here where I can have an opinion. But he is there, we're paying for him, and I'm with you. I don't see why he should be allowed and why they've taken so long. In terms of Ofcom don't really have any jurisdiction, do they, with regard to social media? Do they have any at all at the moment?
No, but it may change. Whether they have some, but they don't have jurisdiction over this. They may, depending on how the online safety bill pans out, they may have some sort of say over that. But the BBC is being brought more and more under Ofcom, and either the BBC is impartial or it isn't. I don't see what difference it makes that Gary Lineker also earns money from other people. The fact of the matter is he's paid an absolute fortune because of a system that will send people to prison if they don't pay it. And this is no way to spend the money, to try and say we'll reach an agreement with him. You either employ him and tell him what to do, or you don't employ him.
And I like your comment that who is employing who here, because I have no idea why they're dilly-dallying about it. I mean, he's clearly breached the guidelines. I mean, in your view, you must be quite well aware of the guidelines. So if there was to be one that you would pick that he's breached, what would be the breach?
Well, just strict impartiality. If we are to take things that Tim Davie has said as gospel, he has said, the BBC stands for anything, it stands for impartiality. So he is just making a monkey of the BBC by saying, it doesn't frighten me to be suspended by the BBC. Well, if I'd earned millions of pounds over the year, I wouldn't be that bothered about whether I was going to be suspended or not. I mean, the whole thing sounds ridiculous, but what it's doing is also effectively weaponising all the MPs who've got it in for the BBC. It's handing them the weapons to shoot. They are their own worst enemy.
It seems just incredible that they would allow him to even consider that he would present Match of the Day on Saturday. I did slightly laugh. I think that's not going to happen. Well, listen, Martin, thank you very much for joining me. That is, of course, Martin.
You're welcome.
Lovely to talk to you. He's the former chief advisor to Ofcom. Right, also joining me now is the sports presenter and journalist Chris Scudder. Chris, what do you make of this? Do you think the BBC have acted correctly? And do you actually believe the idea that because he's a sports presenter, Gary should have some sort of a slightly different path to the people who are presenting news?
I'm not surprised. I mean, they haven't sort of got their wagons circled yet. I was looking at the statement here. Until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media, it all seems a bit vague to me. I'm just going to take you back to, what was it, less than 3 months ago now, when almost the very first link that Gary Lineker made during the Qatar World Cup was a political one. It was talk about, all the controversies, all the backdrop to whether the World Cup should have been played in Qatar. And he was on his soapbox there, given a kind of prepared speech written probably by somebody else. So I think a lot of people are thinking, well, if he can do that, then why can he not have an opinion on domestic policy? That appears to be the problem here. What we have said, he should keep well away from taking sides on any party political issues or political controversies. I think, some people are going to have taken offence by that comparison. Nazi Germany is very strong. People are going to take offence about that. So I'm not surprised it's happened. I'm surprised it's taken so long, but I do think Gary will be back, until I think they'll work a way around this. But for the time being, I think it's probably right that he's not going to be presenting Match of the Day tomorrow night, because it would be a circus, wouldn't it? Well, it would be. And did you think the football world is looking at this and taking any notice of it? Match of the Day probably have exactly the same views with or without him. But do you think there's any effect on the sporting world? No, I'm not listening to these freelance. I mean, he can have an opinion. I've always thought that social media's brought such a massively grey area, hasn't it? I was always told, when I was working full time in television, that you don't tweet what you wouldn't broadcast. Tweets are kind of an aside, aren't they? They're kind of a private view that suddenly becomes very, very visible. If he was to stand there and say that, about Nazi Germany, I wonder whether he would have done, but it seems to be kind of different. But, it is effectively broadcasting, isn't it? When you write something down, you're publishing it. So, he's probably regretting it now, but I think they'll get round it. And as I say, I think he'll be back. I don't think he'll be back, and I don't think that he's... Really? I don't think so, no.
No. And he's got other interests anyway. He's got the whole thing. He's got a podcast company that's doing particularly well. It's a very lucrative business. He doesn't need the BBC. I mean, I think he's got a discussion with the HMRC with regard to IR35, because a lot of BBC presenters, including me, who worked for many other people, were forced into it, as he, I think, may well owe tax because of it, if that is the case. I mean, you know, so he's got this is only the beginning, I think, really, to be honest with you. I think Gary's... people are going to be looking at this as a test case. Do you think that sports presenters should have a different remit to those on news in terms of what they can and can't say?
As I said before, I mean, you know, Twitter's an aside. Tweeting is, it is different. Well, listen, I wouldn't have said it because I think sometimes people. You get the brigade, and Gary Neville's had it. You know, stick to football, Gary, and I think that's fair comment. But you know, he's allowed an opinion, really. I mean, as I said before, I mean, if he's gone on during the World Cup, and the very first thing he said, pretty much, because I remember thinking, wow, you know, it was a soapbox, but was it him? Or was it the BBC? He was speaking for the BBC that day, and it went on for several days. It wasn't just him; it was the pundits as well. This came up time and time again. So, if he's not been made to do that, he probably wanted to do that. But if that happens, then why should he not be able to make his own opinions as well? I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, he's a flaming hypocrite as well, because the soapbox he was standing on was built by slaves. Thank you very much, Chris. It's really good to talk to you. That's Chris Scudder. He's a sports presenter and journalist. Right, well, joining me in the studio is our political reporter, Olivia Utley. Now, we've heard from many Conservative MPs criticised him for his comments. Would the BBC start to be accused of political bias? Do you think that perhaps that's, you know, that they are actually being quite biased, and they're worried about being accused of it?
Well, I think the BBC was in quite an awkward position, because what the case of keeping Gary Lineker on was resting on was the idea that he is a freelancer and therefore not bound to the same impartiality rules as other BBC journalists. I mean, that might be technically correct, but obviously Gary Lineker is more than just any old freelancer. In some respects, he's sort of one of the faces of the BBC. And if he is said to, if he's seen to be saying such inflammatory comments about government policy, then can it really be said that the BBC is showing itself to be entirely and completely impartial? So the BBC was in an awkward position here. But it did come out rooting for Gary Lineker yesterday.
Well, didn't it just? Yes.
Absolutely. And Gary Lineker said that not only did he not apologise, he also implied that he would do the same thing again, which made the BBC in a really, really awkward situation. Now it's reversed on that bullshit statement it made yesterday, essentially coming out in favour of Lineker, and he is coming off air. Now, why is that? Is that because not only the Culture Secretary, but also the Prime Minister made comments suggesting that this was unacceptable, although, of course, it was the final decision of the BBC. And it could be that the BBC simply just does not want to pick this fight with the government. It's already fighting on different fronts. The Richard Sharp investigation is ongoing. That's pretty awkward for them. Do they want to pick this fight with the government now? We obviously know that the licence fee debate goes on. The government holds the BBC's fate in its hands, essentially, and the BBC might have just felt that this was one fight with the Conservative government too many.
Well, listen, there has been an update because there is confusion at the moment, and it's been reported that Lineker did not step back from presenting tomorrow's show because he has refused to apologise for his tweet.
As far as I understand, what's happened is that Sky News has come out and suggested that, is reporting that the BBC statement, which said that Gary Lineker stepped back, is incorrect. What happened was Gary Lineker was pulled off air because he refused to apologise. So as far as I can see, Gary Lineker stepped in and suggested that the BBC statement is inaccurate because it suggests that it was the result of a conversation with the BBC, whereas actually Lineker is saying that he was pulled off. So the fight between Lineker and the BBC is certainly intensifying.
Because I wonder, I mean, I look at at this and I sort of think, well, what is it? What is it that he has on them why they won't do what they would do with other presenters? And I know you've made a distinction between freelance and staff, but actually at the BBC and having worked there, they don't really make much of a distinction in terms of that. So if you're a freelancer, they still will, if you post something they don't like, they still will come for you. And I know this because actually only a little while ago, one of my, a good friend of mine made a comment after Gary had posted something, made a comment on Gary's tweet, which he didn't like. He thought it was offensive. And within 10 minutes, his bosses at the BBC had called him up and said, look, take that down. Not tell Gary off, but take that down. So, and he also was a freelancer. So I think the BBC are hiding behind the distinction between freelancers and full-time staff because it doesn't really make much difference if you work for them.
Interesting.
So that's it, yeah. So Gary Lineker, it looks like, Gary seems to be, well, I don't think he's coming back. Well, joining me now is social commentator Narinder Kaur. Narinder, talk to me about this. Gary Lineker has, let me just remind people, in a statement the BBC's released this in the last hour, BBC have been in extensive discussions with Gary, and he is now not being pulled off Match of the Day. He's just not presenting Match of the Day for some reason. Narinder, what's your view on all of this?
Well, I'm absolutely outraged, as you can imagine, because I think if there's ever proof that the BBC has been run by this right-wing government, this is it, actually, because smells a bit like 1930s Germany. I think Gary Lineker may have had a point, Nana, because the fact is, Gary Lineker was allowed to say, he's always had political opinions. He's always said stuff, but he's never been pulled off air. Why was he pulled off air this time? Maybe had he agreed with this immigration bill, he may still be presenting tomorrow. This is absolutely outrageous. I'm absolutely disgusted in what's happening in this country. And the fact is, the BBC is bowing down to the government. The government are running the BBC. It's not right. This is not the country I want to live in.
Well, where are you going to go, Narinder? Crikey, we've got loads of work. I wouldn't if I were you. You'll have to do everything down the line.
I think it's outrageous.
You'll have to do it all down the line. Narinder, listen. OK, so, first of all, the comparison with Nazi Germany, a lot of Jewish groups have taken huge offence at that, right? Because, remember, the government's policies are not designed to kill people, whereas if you look at Nazi Germany in the 30s, the policies that happened there were trying to extinguish and exterminate a race of people, a people. This is not what's happening. It diminishes what happened in the Holocaust and what happened in Nazi Germany by using this particular event and this particular policy, which simply is about trying to control a migrant crisis, by comparing it to a Holocaust, Narinder. Can you not see? Can you not see? Can you not see that that is unacceptable?
No, the Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers, it started with vile words. And Gary Lineker didn't say Nazi Germany, he said 1930s Germany. And actually, Nana, I think today...
Well, let's not split hairs, shall we?
I think he's got a point. He's got a point, because the fact is, he's been censored. This is censorship. I thought GBNews was about free speech and not cancel culture. We're now having cancel culture.
This is not, Narinder,
platform.
Narinder, I think you're confusing breaching impartiality guidelines when you work for an organisation that is state-owned with free speech. Gary Lineker is entitled to his free speech and nobody's cancelling Gary Lineker. What is happening to Gary Lineker is because he works at the BBC, who I worked for myself and was bound by exactly the same rules of impartiality as he is, so I was not able to go out and talk about things, and I lost 2 gigs because of it at the BBC. So I know
but that wasn't
if...
right,
Hang on,
Nana,
sorry, can I finish? Can I finish? We are all bound by the same impartiality rules. So just to step back on your point that it's free speech, it's got nothing to do with free speech. If he wants to have the free speech and wants to say what he likes about politics, simply join another organisation. That's the deal with the BBC. We pay for them.
Not really, because Alan Chuck can say what he likes, can't he? He said about the rail strikers, he said about Mick Lynch, he said plenty of things. Fiona Bruce almost, applauded wife beaters yesterday. So no, they pick and choose, because the government have got power over the BBC here. So they didn't like what Gary Lineker said against the Tory government's immigration bill, and now he's been taken off air. This is cancel culture, and we are living in censorship.
OK, first of all, with regards to Fiona Bruce, I mean, she didn't... That could be your interpretation of it. I don't think she meant it that way, and she's also not here to defend herself. But let's stick to that, and she's probably next. Actually, the BBC will probably be having words with her anyway. And as for the other person who said they let off, they shouldn't be letting people off who are saying things that are breaching the BBC guidelines, and they should be punished.
Well, they did. And therefore Gary Lineker has been taken off air now because he just gave an opinion on his platform.
No, but that's the point. No,
He didn't say on air, Nana. He didn't
that's
say
irrelevant.
it on Match of the Day.
Listen, Narinda, it's irrelevant. And I know this because I myself had 2 things taken away from me, not for saying something on the BBC, but for saying somewhere else, on air, somewhere else. And I, too, was a freelancer. So I know the guidelines.
Oh, was
I know
that
the
correct? Did you think that was correct?
Listen, I accepted it because I accepted I'd breached the guidelines. I accepted it, yeah? I accepted it. And in the end, Narinda, do you know what I did in the end, Narinda? Do you know what I did in the end? Do you know what I did in the end? I left. I joined GB News, where I can have an opinion, yeah?
So therefore, the BBC is government-led, and it's what the government approved, and therefore it's okay. So when he was criticising Qatar, that was all okay.
No,
that wasn't politically
No, it wasn't
motivated.
acceptable at all. He should never have
So
gotten
he
the state
wasn't taken off air, Nana.
Well, he should have been. Narinda Kaur, thank you so much. We're running out of time. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, well, this is a very fast-moving story. In the last few moments, Ian Wright has confirmed that he will not appear on Match of the Day tomorrow. Wright is a regular guest on the programme, but he's tweeted, everybody knows what Match of the Day means to me, but I've told the BBC I won't be doing it tomorrow. Solidarity. Really? Well, they'll replace you as well. A reminder of what started with this whole story. On Tuesday, Gary Lineker responded to a video from Home Secretary Suella Braverman where she outlined the government's illegal migrant bill, saying it was beyond awful. Now, when he was pulled up on his comment, Lineker replied, there is no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany, sorry, no Nazi Germany, but by Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order? Well, lots of you have been getting in touch with us because it's a huge story. We'll be looking at those views very shortly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nana, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The BBC says Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement has been reached on his social media usage. It follows comments he made on Twitter criticising the government's new asylum policy. He likened the language used to that of 1930s Germany. In a statement, the broadcaster said, "We have never said that Gary can't have a view on issues that matter to him, but he should keep well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies." Well, in the last few minutes, football commentator Ian Wright has said on Twitter that he's told the BBC he won't be joining this Saturday's show in a move of solidarity with Mr. Lineker. Well, in other news, Rishi Sunak has agreed to give France almost £500 million over the next 3 years in an attempt to end the Channel migrant crisis. The Prime Minister held talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris today before announcing the landmark deal, which will see a new detention centre established in France. The joint news conference followed the first bilateral summit between the two countries in 5 years. Mr. Sunak says the new illegal migrant legislation introduced this week supports this new deal.
Announcing a new detention centre in northern France, a new command centre bringing our enforcement teams together in one place for the first time, and an extra 500 new officers patrolling French beaches. All underpinned by more drones and other surveillance technologies that will help ramp up the interception rate. And the legislation the UK has introduced this week supports this, because it's designed to break the business model of the criminal gangs and remove the pull factors bringing them to the Channel coast.
Drivers were left stranded for hours this morning with heavy snowfall holding up traffic. Storm Larissa hit the UK overnight, causing flights to be suspended and rail services delayed as fallen trees blocked some lines. The Met Office has yellow warnings for snow and ice in place for parts of the UK over the weekend, and people are being urged to only travel if necessary. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's coming up to 36 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. I'm in for Patrick. Let's return to the breaking news that Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement has been made regarding his social media use. Now, this comes after Impartiality rows over comments that he made criticising the government's new asylum policy. He compared the language used by Swiller Breverman to Germany in the 1930s. And as a reminder, in a statement, the BBC said the BBC has decided that he will step back from presenting Match of the Day until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media. When it comes to leading our football and sports coverage, Gary is second to none. We have never said that Gary should be an opinion-free zone or that he can't have a view on issues that matter to him. But we have said that he should keep well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies. And in the last few minutes, fellow Match of the Day presenter Ian Wright says that he will not present tomorrow night's show as a show of solidarity with Gary Lineker. Hey, look, there's plenty of other young pundits who would love to do their job, so, be warned, Ian, that might not be the best course of action. Well, joining me now is sports broadcaster and journalist Aidan McGee. Aidan, well, this is big news. I mean, it's not left the front covers of many of the newspapers, and obviously I've had had my own say in it. For the football world, I mean, look, Ian Wright's joined in now. Is this becoming something that people actually care about?
Difficult to answer that one, because I think that the history of celebrities making comments on politics shows that actually it probably doesn't change many opinions anyway. If we hear somebody speaking about a particular or taking a particular angle, often we either just let it wash over us, or in some cases when it comes to politics we think, well, actually we don't like their view, so we're going to take the opposite view. So I think we react to it a little bit too much. I'm really surprised Ian Wright has come off air. I mean, that's a show of solidarity, but as you say, there are plenty of other people who would kill for their careers to present Match of the Day. I also think that one thing that's not been mentioned enough in this whole coverage in the last few days, Nana, is your previous guest, Narinder Kaur, said that Gary Lineker's always had political opinions. Well, he has in the last 4 or 5 years. Prior to that, you rarely heard him comment about politics at all. Now, he's a 62-year-old white man. He contemporaries like Phil Thompson at Sky, Matt Le Tissier at Sky, Mark Lawrenson at the BBC, Alan Hansen deplatformed because, again, they don't fit the demographic that the BBC is edging towards. And so there's a degree of trying to use politics here, the right kind of politics, which some people would call it rather menacingly, to stay relevant. And that's really what this is about. He didn't suddenly develop a social conscience 5 years ago at the age of 58. This is strategized. There's meaning behind this. And it's with the aim of keeping his job for as long as possible.
Do you think, because some of the comments he's made, do you think a lot of the football fans actually wouldn't agree with? So, like the comment that he made, I would have thought the footballing world may be more on the side of actually doing something about this migrant issue than not. Do you think that actually he's probably picked a bad hill to die on?
I do think that, but also a lot of people agree with him, Nana, as well. Now, I do think he's a good presenter. I think this is a holding position for the BBC. I think it suits them to put their foot on the ball, to, pardon the pun if you like, and do probably what TalkSport did earlier in the season when Trevor Sinclair came out with some inflammatory comments around the death of the Queen. He was just put out to graze for a few months and then just edged back in through the back door when everyone had stopped talking about it. One thing we know about today's news and the dissemination of facts is that over a period of time, a shorter and shorter period of time in the social media era, things do blow over. We saw it loads of times with whenever the England manager Sven-Göran Eriksson got into indiscretions. That was pre-social media. It's a question of riding out the storm. I don't think we'll see Gary Lineker on Match of the Day before the end of the season, but come August, I think he'll be right back there. When I was at Sky, we had the same problem with Jamie Carragher. He spat at a fan. He was filmed on social media. It went everywhere for the whole world to see, and they edged him back in over a period of time. So there's also the contract to consider here as well. We don't know what Gary Lineker's contract says in terms of just dismissing him. So I think it's a temporary reprieve for all parties, and then edging back in when people stop talking about it.
I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen with Gary. I think he's just one too many political spats. But thank you so much, Aidan. Really good to talk to you. That is Aidan McGee. He's a journalist, sports journalist. Right, joining me now in Southampton is legend and football pundit Matt Le Tissier. Matt, good to see you. He's getting his hands in politics again. Sick of it. I'm sick and tired of it. But what do you make of all of this?
Well, firstly, as you know, I'm a big advocate of freedom of speech, so I think Gary should be entitled to his opinion. I think the only possible caveat to that is the terms of Gary's contract, and it appears from the statement from the BBC that there seems to be something in there that says he's got to stay away from partisan political issues. And if that is the case, then obviously he's breached his contract. So there is certainly an issue there for him if he has done that. But I don't mind people having an opinion. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. Nobody's forced to listen to it. We could disregard Gary's opinions, like a lot of the stuff that he talks about. We hear it, and it just goes, "Oh, mate, I disregard it," because it's just that's his opinion, and if people don't agree with it, just ignore it.
Yeah, but Matt, this is a conflation of freedom of speech with the fact that you've joined the state-owned broadcaster where you're not really meant to make political comments, and literally everyone at the BBC, even if you have a bit less or a bit more of the impartiality I know there, I've worked for them, I think you've probably worked for them as well, or maybe, but we all know that if you choose to work for the BBC, then you know you've foregone your right to make these political comments. There are plenty of other places you can work. He has so many options open to him. So I keep hearing people conflate it with freedom of speech and think it's got nothing to do with freedom of speech. He's free to speak, but there are consequences.
That's why I made the point about the terms of his contract. And so that's the only caveat to it all. And if he's breached the terms of that contract, then obviously he's going to have the consequences of that.
Now, Gary's obviously, if he's not presenting it and Ian Wright's now decided he's not going to do it, do you think it will make any difference at all? Will the viewers of Match of the Day even care? I mean, you know, it's like a cat. It goes to one house and it gets more food at the next one, so it goes to the house where there's food. You know, even if it's your own cat, it will go to somebody else's house.
As I think you mentioned before, there's plenty of other people who would, kill for a job like that. It's an amazing job. He's had it for a long time. The only bit of that BBC statement I don't agree with, where it said he was second to none. I think he ums and ahs way too much to be second to anybody, and certainly not second to none. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And yes, it's sad for him, but I guess he would have known the consequences. And still decided to do that anyway. So that's completely up to him. And as I said, you're right. There are plenty of other jobs for him if he wants to be free to air his political opinions. Then absolutely right. Go and work for someone else.
Maybe he thought this was going to be like another Teflon Gary moment, but maybe not. Maybe this one will actually stick. What about Ian Wright? Ian Wright has decided that he's not going to do it either. Now, you can, if you step into that arena and do it once, you're going to have to do it for as long as Gary's not there. Or is Ian Wright going to come back the following week? I mean, I'm just wondering, what do you think about Ian?
It's really interesting, and Ian has taken a stand there for standing up for his mate and his fellow TV worker. But what's really interesting about it is if you go back 3 years. And have a look at the reaction that Ian Wright had to the sacking of myself, Phil Thompson and Charlie Nicholas. And you will see that reaction is completely contradictory to the way he reacted to this. So, it's all very well, taking this stand, but, let's show a bit of consistency in this writing.
Well,
what I'm talking about. If you're watching, you know what I'm on about.
Well, listen, some people don't know. I don't know. What happened? Did he not join in? He didn't step back when you were fired or whatever it was?
No, he certainly didn't. He certainly didn't stand in solidarity with the three of us. That's for sure. It was a case of, people, old people who have had their time, and it's time to move on to some younger people.
Oh, right.
Along those lines. But it shouldn't be too hard to find it.
All right, interesting stuff. Well, listen, Matt Le Tissier, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Will you be watching Match of the Day tomorrow without Gary and Ian?
No, I'll be around my neighbour's house celebrating his birthday. So I will not be watching Match of the Day. But sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I find it easier to actually record it, and then I can just fast forward past the boring bits.
And do you care that Gary's not presenting it and Ian won't be there either? Will it make a difference to you?
No.
Exactly. Thank you, Matt Le Tissier. Lovely to talk to you. That is Matt Le Tissier, former Southampton and England footballer and a football pundit. Well, joining me in the studio now is political reporter Olivia Utley. Now, there's been a number of political commentators and Conservative MPs who have been calling for Gary Lineker to go. Have they effectively removed him from his position?
It sounds as though the BBC have unwillingly taken Gary Lineker off air, and that is very interesting because yesterday the BBC came out rooting for Lineker, really, and it sounded very much as though he was going to keep his job. 24 hours later, they've completely reversed that position, and from what Lineker is suggesting to Sky, he has now been taken off air without unwillingly, essentially. So what does that mean? Has the BBC essentially decided that it just doesn't want to pick this fight with the government? Because all that's happened between yesterday and today is that Conservative MPs have piled in condemning Gary Lineker for his tweet and even suggesting that it was unacceptable and that although none of them quite went as far as to say that he should be sacked, they all said that it was a decision for the BBC, but they all made it very, very clear that they felt that he should go. So is it that the BBC has simply decided that it has too much on its plate at the moment to pick a fight with the Conservative government? Obviously, on the other side, it's already in a row about this Richard Sharp affair. Richard Sharp, who helped secure a loan for Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister, is now being accused of political bias towards the Conservatives. So there's a question mark over his future. Now there's this question mark over Gary Lineker and what they do about him. So they're essentially fighting on two fronts. They're fighting the right and the left. And it seems like perhaps they've just decided that picking a fight with the Conservative government, who were already, cutting their budget left, right and centre, just might not be the most sensible move for them. So it could be that they've essentially done this in order to placate the Tory government. That might be a bit of an own goal because, of course, they now unable to get Ian Wright to host the show, and it could be that there are some people who feel that this is a mistake and that the BBC is now pandering to a Conservative government and that the BBC is now biased to the right. So it's very difficult to see how the BBC can win from this position.
Well, what about Labour politicians, though? Has anyone come out on the Labour side and made comment and criticised this?
Well, mostly it's been Conservative MPs, and we've seen really senior Conservative MPs. It's quite interesting the level at which they're intervening. So we had Penny Mordaunt, leader of the Commons, talking about it in the Commons yesterday, and Gary Lineker actually swiped back at her on Twitter, so showing absolutely no remorse at all for his original tweet. Then there was an urgent question in the House of Commons, which the DCMS Secretary Lucy Fraser answered and was very strong in her language, condemning Gary Lineker. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, also piled in there. So you're seeing the extent to which this has gone down very badly with the Conservative government at a very high level. And of course, in some of the papers which are more to the centre right, the Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, even the Times calling for Gary Lineker to go. So the BBC was under quite a lot of social pressure here and might simply have decided that they're fighting wars on too many fronts to pick a fight with the Conservative establishment.
Really? You think that they're do you not suspect, because obviously the BBC are supposed to be apolitical, so they're not supposed to be involved in politics in any way. So do you think that perhaps they may be considering that they need to, in order to survive, they need to maintain this impartiality? Because otherwise, as you talk about people saying, oh, well, they're trying to appease the Tory government, people will start to see a sort of political bias in their behaviour. So they're trying to... Do you think that maybe they're just trying to neutralise things?
Well, yes, quite possibly. But of course, that while they're still fighting this Richard Sharp affair, already you've got left-wing commentators coming out and suggesting that they've got rid of Gary Lineker very quickly, really, for tweeting against the Conservative government. Meanwhile, Richard Sharp was hanging on for a very long time when he appeared to have massively broken impartiality guidelines. I mean, we still don't know exactly what happened, by helping the Prime Minister to broker this agreement. So it's tricky for the BBC. It's always got this delicate balancing act. It may be that it is just trying to restore its reputation for impartiality, but there could certainly be an element here, at least, of the BBC simply not wanting to pick another fight with the Conservative government, with just the weight of Conservative MPs piling onto this tweet.
Well, it shouldn't really be their fight to fight. They shouldn't be involved in it. Olivia Utley, thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you. She's our political reporter. Now, Channel 5 News presenter Dan Walker used to present football on the BBC, and he says that Gary Lineker has messaged him saying that it was not his decision to step back from his role on Match of the Day. The BBC have told him he had to step back. With me now is sports journalist Harry Harris. Harry, what do you make of those reports that the BBC told him to step back? I mean, I'm not surprised, Harry, but, I mean, if I was the BBC, I'd have told him to step back a long time ago.
I think for me, I'm reading between the lines and listening to the statement from the BBC when they talked about trying to reach agreement with Gary Lineker. I don't know whether you've ever tried reaching agreement with Gary Lineker. It's not going to be easy. And for me, I think that is the key word, because I think what has happened in 24 hours, I think the BBC have tried to get Gary to adhere to the impartiality agreement, which overrides everyone who works for the BBC. He feels he's untouchable. He's made many tweets that breaches the impartiality agreement and got away with it. So he probably feels he can continue to do so. I think the BBC have told him this is the end of the story for him. He has to adhere to the impartiality agreement, which he's signed. And I don't think he's going to be silenced. I think this is the last you see of Gary Lineker on Match of the Day.
Yeah, I think you're right there. But didn't you travel the world with Gary Lineker? You said what was he like? Is he a tricky guy to get on with?
I mean, it's great company. But I tell you what, he knows his own mind and he sticks to it. You find it very difficult to change it. You could call him stubborn, but you know, he knows what he wants. He knows what he's doing. He's got many other irons in the fire. He won't be short of money if this job eludes him, which I think it's going to. And I said yesterday here on this programme that I think it's going to be sooner rather than later that Jermaine Genius replaces him as a consequence of this. And I'm still of that mind. I just don't think this is a temporary measure. And I think Ian Wright is wrong, pardon the pun. I don't think it says in his tweet that was asked to present. I think he would just be one of the pundits. And I think, of course, he feels a loyalty to Gary Lineker. I think it's misplaced. He needs to realise that a lot of people were upset by what he said. It was a nonsense of what he said, and I agree with a lot of people saying they should just ignore what he says.
Well, listen, Harry, we're running out of time.
I don't think you should be offended by it, but a lot of people can be, and it can be
Harry, listen,
inflammatory.
we're running out of time. But I do appreciate your thoughts. It's really good to talk to you. That's Harry Harris. He's a sports journalist. This is GB News, and lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts. I had to make sure we make time for those on Gary Lineker stepping back from Match of the Day, or not stepping back, being forced to step back. Jeff says, so now the BBC will pay Lineker 1.75 million, it was 1.35 actually a year, not to do Match of the Day. Well, hopefully that will stop soon as well. Sylvia says other members of BBC staff had to comply with impartiality rules. Why shouldn't he? Plenty more people can do what he does. No one is just indispensable. And actually, they'll probably be saving money by not having him on. Brian says, no Gary Lineker, no Ian Wright. I might start watching Match of the Day again. Very good. Well, this was the tweet that Lineker sent on Tuesday that caused a lot of controversy. There is no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is no dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order, he's asking. Really? Yes, of course he's out of order. He's totally out of order. It's a ridiculous thing to say. Well, listen, on the way, Michelle Dewberry will be here. Michelle, good to see you. What do you think? This is all kicking off with Gary Lineker.
I know. I had this fantastic show planned. I knew what I was doing. And then, boom, this came along and ruined it all. So, yes, I will, of course, be getting into all of this Lineker thing, reaction to that. And what a great guest I've got. I happen to have the founder of the Free Speech Union. It's almost like I planned it.
Wow.
Plus, Paul Embry as well. He's been in trouble previously for being outspoken on political topics, so interested in that. Lots of reaction as well I'll be looking at to the Lineker story. And also, I want to look at the plan that's kicked all of this off. There's been a summit, hasn't there, between Sunak and Macron, the first one in many years. Some stuff's come out of that. So let's have a little delve into it, see what has created all this controversy in the first place.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a cracking show.
Thank you, Nana.
Definitely watching that. Well, listen, stay with us on GB GB News. I'm just going to read some of your tweets, by the way, some of your messages that you sent with regard to Lineker. Patricia says that shook Lineker up, and his buddy has gone as well. He obviously agrees with the tweet. It's time the BBC stopped being a broadcaster on the left and went back to being as it used to be. It's been full of left-wing folk who have their own agenda for a long time, and it's a shame I don't watch and begrudge the fee. That's Pat, she's saying that. A lot of people saying similar things. Stephen says Lineker, simple Lineker, thinks he's better than the BBC. And Joe says, how sad, never mind. Guardian gets it wrong, laugh out loud. Very good, I like that. Well, it's been a pleasure as ever. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll do one more. Diane says, government need to defend BBC and fund GB News, the People's Channel. What a way to end. Listen, thank you so much for your company. I'm back tomorrow, my usual time, 4 to 6 on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Join me there. Michelle is up next.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
And this Saturday, we've got an exclusive interview with the Chancellor.
I'm not going to have another leadership campaign.
Well, never again. You might do.
No, never again.
We'll be asking him about corporation tax rises, energy prices. We'll also be asking him about his time as Secretary of State for Health and Chairman of the Health Select Committee, and whether or not we should have had such a fierce lockdown.
It's an interview that you can't miss, so join us this Saturday, 10 to 12 on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight.